Mic check 1 2 1 2. Can anyone hear me out there in the chat? Let me see if my mic volume is up. Okay. All right. Black Cyber Network, what's going on? Brother, truth be told, what's going on? Isaac of Olympia, what's going on? Yeah, please hit the like button as you come in. Share the video if possible. This is Geopolitics, episode 265. This is docket in the description beneath the video for you to follow along with. I'll give you guys another 60 seconds before we get started. Yeah, we're gonna have to get it in, man. This is the final night for Hangouts, Google Hangouts. So at least allegedly, I have no idea if they may extend it out, man. A lot of people are not going to be too happy with this, especially if they can't get total buy-in from everybody. There may be some pushback. I wouldn't be surprised. So I'll wait to see what happens tomorrow morning, um, around 6 in the morning. What happens? If there's a lot of pushback, then you may see Google Hangouts stick around for a few more months or something. Hey, DE Raptor, shalom. What's going on, Cream Austin? Yeah, Isaac. So what's happening here is if you want to host a panel like we do traditionally, and everybody else does in YouTube, then that feature is going away after tonight. So a lot of these panel discussions that you used to see, you're used to seeing, is will be no longer according to YouTube. Um, whether they stick with this commitment, I don't know. I think personally, if there's enough pushback, they'll probably delay it. But so many people have already started searching for different platforms. It could be it could be a bit of a problem because some people have already switched. And then there's some people who kind of went to a completely different platform like Facebook or something like that. There's a whole lot of areas of concern as to what's to come out of all of this August 1st. You know what? Let me get into this first thing, man, that just came across the news bulletin about a couple hours ago. Actually, about an hour ago. It's just about that much. Let me get into it now. All right, here we go. This one is from CNN.com. This isn't even on the docket. This just came across the headlines about an hour ago. U.S. Navy jet crashes in Death Valley Park, injuring 7. A U.S. Navy FA-18E Super Hornet jet crashed Wednesday in Death Valley National Park at a spot known to aviation enthusiasts as Star Wars Canyon, according to park spokesman Patrick Taylor, who told CNN that 7 visitors suffered minor injuries as a result. As a general rule, military jets are not allowed to fly over national parks, but an exception was made over this section of Death Valley when it became to when it became a national park 25 years ago. In fact, Taylor said that particular vista is a popular place to watch military training flights. The crash occurred east of Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake in California, according to the Navy. Search and rescue personnel on the scene and the status of the pilot is currently unknown. Lieutenant Commander Lydia Bach, a spokesperson for the Joint Strike Fighter Wing, said in her statement. The cause of the crash is currently under investigation, Bach added. The FA-18 had been assigned to the Vigilantes of Strike Fighter Squadron, VFA 151, based at Naval Air Station Lemoore, California. U.S. Naval Air Forces had issued a tweet earlier Wednesday confirming a crash had taken place at approximately 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and FA-18E crashed near Knowles. CL search and rescue efforts are underway. Naval Air Forces tweeted from its verified Twitter account. A spokesperson for the Inyo County Sheriff's Office, Karma Roper, told CNN that they were helping to secure the area until the military arrived on scene. Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake is located in the western Mojave Desert region of California and is approximately 125 miles north of Los Angeles. The FA-18 Strike Fighter forms the backbone of the Navy's jet fleet, and the Super Hornet variant became operational in 2001. So this is fairly recent, a few hours ago. I know that the stop sharing. I know that the F-18 is supposed to be not so much of a one-trick pony, but it only serves a purpose for the Navy, and not so much as the Air Force. So it doesn't get a whole lot of activity unless it's assigned a role. And that being said, I would have thought that you know they tear these planes down after a certain amount of hours and then build them right back up. I don't know the process. I know DE Raptor is a former Air Force person, so he can probably speak better to it. But planes falling out of the sky, that's never a good idea. That's never a good thing. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It, it doesn't surprise me. You have to keep in mind that these planes getting off the ground is actually a phenomenal thing because realistically they should never get off the ground. So they're actually pretty good um, in terms of engineering, but they're not active. They're not in the active war, so I'm not sure what the maintenance, upkeep, and uh, what the standards are. I can't imagine that this thing missed a maintenance cycle or something like that, and then it just fell out the sky, and no one knew anything about it. There had to be some kind of check engine light that showed up, at some point, and this guy must have bailed out. He had to have bailed out. And maybe if he did bail out, he probably didn't survive the impact once he came down. I don't know. They're not sharing a whole lot of details, from what I understand. All right. Oh, Mr. D Raptor, what's going on?
I'm okay. How you doing, man?
All right. I don't know if you read the news or you heard the news. F-18. Right.
Yeah, the 18 is actually a variant of the 16.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Um,
Mr. D Raptor, what's going on?
I'm okay. How you doing, man?
All right. I don't know if you read.
The 18, like I said, the 18 is actually a variant of the 16, which the Air Force got.
Mm-hmm.
But their aircraft is actually a little bit heavier
Mm-hmm.
because it's made for carrier duty, and it's a multi-role. I mean, the Navy uses it for almost everything. As an attack fighter, um, you can actually put equipment on there that it can allow you to stand off and look. Say they want to look at what Iran is doing 50 miles into Iran, they can stand off the 12-mile limit and look inside.
Okay.
But the airplane, I mean, all of those airplanes um, have a problem that they don't know how to fix, and that the oxygen system on the airplane. I don't know if you're familiar with civilian aircraft. The O2 system, the
Mm-hmm.
air that you breathe in the airplane is filtered.
Mm-hmm.
It actually comes off the front of the engine, it's, on the fan side of the blades,
Mm-hmm.
and the aft side of the engine. They mix the two. They mix like cold air
Mm-hmm.
and warm air from different sections of the engine, run it through filters, and then put it in the cabin to help pressurize the airplane and give you breathing air.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what happened is that the military,
Mm-hmm.
to make the airplanes lighter,
Mm-hmm.
took off the O2 systems, which we used to have these huge oxygen bottles that we had to refill every time the aircraft landed. And that's a lot of weight. If you can use that weight for ordnances, you're gaining a lot of weight. And
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to mix the instead of using like a pack system that the aircraft, that civilian aircraft use, they use the front prior inlet air and
Mm-hmm.
exhaust air. Not actually exhaust, but the air comes off the side of the engine that's heated.
Mm-hmm.
This air might be 500 degrees, and then
Wow.
they mix it with air from the outside, which is like minus 50 degrees, you know, and that's the air that they filter and give to the pilots. Um, they can't get the mix right, and it's causing a lot of problems. At one time, the crews started refusing to fly the airplanes because they're afraid that they're going to die. And when you're in a situation where you're making a hard turn, your body is kind of like you need all the oxygen that your body needs all the oxygen it can take in.
Because all the chief forces.
Yeah, G forces just, I mean, heat you up.
Yeah.
So it could be that they haven't solved it. It could be this situation. I'm kind of unless you if the pilot didn't get out, it's like I would say 80%. That's what the reason was. Because if the pilot should be able to get out of the airplane if there's something wrong with the aircraft itself. That
Hmm.
seat works. I mean, I've seen those seats go off with the safety pins in, on the ground. So the seats work. I mean, I've never seen one that didn't work when it was set off.
Hmm.
So those seats work. If he had enough power to pull that handle, the seat's going to come out. So if he didn't get out of the airplane, he was probably incapacitated before the airplane went into a dive or whatever happened to it.
I would think that there must be some safety mechanisms though that that would say pull up, kind of like a Boeing a jet, jumbo jet, right? Would tell you to pull up,
Yeah, there's all of that, but if you're incapacitated, you can't do it.
and
What it
the plane doesn't have an override feature to basically keep the plane going until it actually just runs out of fuel.
what they do is try to keep the airplane in the air, and they have this um, system that's supposed to, if you're flying into the ground, if the airplane sees itself is flying into the ground,
Hmm.
it can bring it itself up to a level flight.
Level up.
Right. But what can you do if you're coming in at a low level target? Say you come in at, I don't know, 3,000
Hmm.
feet, trying to hit a target, and when you make that turn to go in on the target, your oxygen system fails, and you can't get out of the airplane.
Wow. So without saying much more, do you think that if the U.S. was to get into a war with with their carriers and they had to deploy those Super Hornets, there's a high probability that these things may not work.
A few, there's always a few people that this is going to happen to.
Hmm.
If you launch 100 airplanes, it may happen to one, or it might not happen in that day at all,
Hmm.
but it's going to happen
Hmm.
because your system is not perfected. It's like on civilian airplanes, I see our pack system fail because the something went wrong somewhere in the system, like a valve freeze up or stop working or something like that, and the
Hmm.
pack will fail. But when one pack fail, you got a crew up there that's going to look at it and say, okay, let's descend to, if you're at 43,000, let's descend to 29,000 because you got one pack.
Hmm.
And if the other pack fail now, you come down to about 14,000, where you don't need a pressurized airplane. You understand?
Hmm.
Um, but when you fly a military jet, when that system failed, you got one system on the airplane. Guess what? You got to head for the lowest altitude that you can and land the airplane right away.
Hmm.
And if it fails, like in a training run, like what they're talking about here, um, you got a big problem. Before it used to be, I've seen it where I've seen bases where I was stationed at where pilots die, and they used to call it target fixation
Wow.
because you can be focused so much on the target, and you kind of like you lose consciousness.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? You're
Hmm.
coming in you're coming in at a target, and you drop down from um, I don't know 20,000 down to about 5,000, making a run into that target.
Hmm.
And if your O2 and your suit pressurization is not working properly, you go into a state of delirium, and you don't know what altitude the airplane at. Normally, your ears will start popping and all that. When you lose consciousness, you can't, you know.
That is no good if you're gonna go to war or in a dogfight. Um, I doubt you have any sort of dogfights nowadays with all the ordnance and
Right.
weaponry. You can see somebody from you can see a target from 100 miles away, so they no way that they they're ever going to get that close to you.
Well, sometimes you do, you know. Sometimes, like, um, sometimes you do. In a case where you suppose you're in the Middle East
Hmm.
and you're in a place like Syria or Iraq or something like that, if they have warplane, by the time um, if you are coming in on attack,
Hmm.
by the time they get their airplanes off the ground,
Hmm.
you are probably over Iraq already. So when they come up into your space, or you got this bubble around you that your
Hmm.
electronics are looking at, and by the time they get into that bubble, it's like you're in a dogfight because now you gotta, if they come up behind you, you gotta try to get behind them
Right.
or get them in a position where they're the target instead of you being the target. So you see what I'm saying? So now
Yeah.
you're in a dogfight. You gotta try to see where they are and maneuver yourself in a position where you can take them out instead of you being the target.
Hmm.
So circumstances like that, it could be. Over the East China Sea, you know, you might be flying along. You think you're in international waters, and the Chinese come up and get off your wing, and if you don't move over, then he might try to bump you. So
Hmm.
guess what? If you're gonna fight, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
you
because
don't
you
need
can't. You need a lot of clearance and space to actually fire off your
to fire off your
air to air.
missile.
Yeah, your
Exactly.
air to airs. Yeah,
Right.
or else you'll
Either
take
fire off your
yourself out too.
missile. Right. Either fire off your missile
Mm-hmm.
or get your gun set up to knock him out.
Hmm.
You know, so you can have dogfights still, but it's not normal because when you know your target, you know, you go in, hit your target, and you get out.
Hmm.
You know.
And depending on how far away you are, you can probably you may not have to go into their airspace. You may be able to do it straight from international airspace, fire
Exactly.
off fire off your missile, then take off.
Yep.
But then you also run the risk of e- during the evasion that these G forces may cause delirium or some form of
Exactly.
fixation.
Because you making a run, and when you fire your what's called your electronics gonna keep tabs on that missile that you fired off,
Hmm.
and it's gonna keep it on target. But after you make that run, you might make that run at 5,000 feet,
Hmm.
you know, because you got to come in low enough that their radar will pick you up. So you make that run at 5,000 feet, and then you're going to make that turn and come back out. And your turn, and you're going from 180
Hmm.
to 350 or 370. Um, I mean 350. Say 350. You're making a 180 almost, and you got to make that turn in about 30 seconds. And with the new aircraft now, you can, I mean, that airplane, it can make some turns that are really dizzy, you know what I'm saying? For
Right.
the orbit, right? So when you make that turn, if your system is not working properly, you're out.
Hmm.
Mm.
All right, let me get to this next article. This one is from Forbes.com. Space Wars. Military satellites will be armed with lasers and guns by 2030. Notice this shit. Last September, the French government accused Russia of an act of space espionage when Moscow signals intelligence satellite Luke uh, Luke Olymp Luke Olymp was steered a bit too closely to France's military communications satellite Athena Fides. It got to It got so close, France's Armed Forces Minister Florence Parly reportedly said at the time that we might have to imagine it was trying to intercept our communications, trying to listen to our neighbors is not only unfriendly, it's an act of espionage. Last week, Parley announced details of a new defense space strategy at the Lyon Mount Verdun Air Defense Operation Base. Having a reinforced space defense is absolutely essential, she said. It is our freedom of appreciation, access, and action in space that is at stake. Francis Lapointe reported that in the summer of 2019, space has finally become a field of action. France's defense minister painted a picture of cameras, machine guns, and lasers on sensitive satellites, able to watch for threats and then fight back. This can be achieved, Lapointe reported, by submachine guns capable of destroying the solar panels of an enemy satellite or by lasers blinding or destroying it entirely. The minister also wants to see swarms of low orbit nanosatellites placed around the most strategic objects and short notice replacements for satellites destroyed by the enemy. The plans also uh, the plans also envisage additional services from France's aerospace and defense giants Ariane Group, Airbus, and Thales. In making the announcement, Parley committed an additional 700 million euros or 780 million US dollars to the 4.3 billion euros or 4.8 billion US dollars already committed to the military space budget by 2025. There is an acknowledgement in these latest developments in France that the rules of engagement in space are set to change dramatically. And while the French government has been at pains to stress that these moves are entirely defensive in nature, the physical attack on foreign space assets is currently outlawed. Earlier in July, French President Emmanuel Macron announced the creation of a space command, essentially expanding the remit of the country's air force. The new military space doctrine, he said, ensure our defenses are of space using space weapons. France's establishment of a space command follows the U.S. doing the same as announced by U.S. President Donald Trump late last year. Space is no longer a new frontier, but one that is critical to today's battlefield communications and surveillance ecosystem. There has been a hasty realization in recent years that investments by China and Russia in offensive space capabilities, especially on the cyber front, has left the United States and its allies on the back foot. Although United States space systems have historically maintained a technological advantage over those of our potential adversaries, the new directive signed by the president in February stated those potential adversaries are now advancing their space capabilities and actively developing ways to deny our use of space in a crisis or conflict. Early this month, I reported that new research suggested that US and NATO command and control systems are already open to compromise because of vulnerabilities in the satellite systems carrying mission critical data. Cyber attacks on satellites have the potential to wreak havoc on strategic weapon systems and undermine deterrence by creating uncertainty and confusion. Given the critical reliance on our space assets to direct modern warfare and the vulnerability of those assets, it would be prudent to assume that an adversary is already active in these networks and focus on resilience measures with increased urgency for advanced techniques to identify and respond to modern threats. According to Florence Parley, active defense is not an offensive strategy. It's a self-defense. When a when a hostile act has been identified, it is acceptable within international law to respond in an appropriate and proportionate manner. The law does not seem Does not exempt self-defense. It does not prohibit militarization. It does not prevent weaponization. I'm not gonna read into all of this, but putting machine guns on satellite um seems very hostile and aggressive, because now it's not even about defense. It's about, you can still use that same satellite even if nobody's attacking you to take down other satellites, even if they're not in your vicinity, if you have a clear line of sight. But what happens if there's other satellites that are moving in adjacent control planes, or saying grid coordinates? You may run the risk of one bullet just taking out a solar array on a satellite, and it may not even be the enemies or what you consider to be the enemy. It could very well be one of your friends or some commercial satellite. That's a very risky move if you're France.
You remember last week, Macron made the announcement that they're going to start this. They're going to do the same that the U.S. is doing right now and start the Space Force.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you, one of the reasons why Trump is getting out of these a lot of these treaties, because they want to put military weapons in space.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to put military weapons in space, you can't have the treaties that they have now, nuclear weapons,
Mm-hmm.
because they did part of the contract was that they wouldn't put nuclear weapons in space,
Yeah,
so
that's a
they had to let it expire. They had it
mm-hmm.
so that they can create the weapons. And when after they create the weapons, now they can say, "Well, look, we're gonna have this treaty where we're gonna keep our weapons in space. The weapons that we got there, we're gonna keep, but we're not gonna put any more there."
Mm-hmm.
So that's what this part of this. What you're seeing now is because of that.
Yeah, this is very risky. You have all these little small satellites, what they call nanosats and cubesats, um, floating around the Earth, especially with Elon Musk and SpaceX and uh, Jeff um, Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin. They launched their satellites. This is a big problem. Bullets flying, lasers being pointed. I mean, we don't even know what the impact of that can be if a laser misses its target, because potentially the adversary satellite shifted at the last second, and then next thing you know, the laser hits somebody on the ground, or it hits a plane that's in flight.
Well, when you're talking about low Earth orbit, you got all those problems.
Yeah.
The potential is there.
Hmm.
So
Maybe the French should be less worried about its satellites, and be more worried about the yellow vest protests in their capital of Paris. So I mean,
again,
they
like,
were. Bullet Two Tone says, "Have we tested firing bullets in space?" I would assume that the bullets they be using is depleted uranium.
yeah, but you can do that test here on the planet. You can do that test terrestrial. They have um, there are places where they test these things. That's how they test satellites. They put them in almost a virtual vacuum. Space is not a total vacuum. You gotta remember that.
Hmm.
It doesn't have that pressure that the Earth has. We don't live in a vacuum. Our planet has a certain pressure, especially um, when you're on the planet, when you're on the ground. As you get further and further out into space, you go up. 10 miles. Then
Hmm.
it changes. The atmospheric pressure changes. But they can recreate that in a lab. They can recreate, I mean, minus 2000 degrees, you know, or they can 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, you know, either heat or cold. All that can be done in the lab. So they can test fire weapons on the ground here on Earth to see how they work. And then
Hmm.
when they put them in space, then of course they're going to use them. No weapon ever created by man that has never been used. None.
Hmm. All right, let me get to this next article. This one is from Reuters.com. U.S. Marines likely to enter Venezuela, says Socialist Party number two. Venezuelan Socialist Party Vice President Diosdado Cabello on Saturday predicted U.S. Marines will likely enter the South American country, speaking a week after a confrontation between aircraft belonging to the two countries' armed forces. We are a small country. We are very humble, and here it is likely that the U.S. Marines enter. It is likely that they enter, Cabello told the Sao Paulo Forum, a gathering of leftist politicians and activists from across Latin America without citing evidence. Their problem will be getting out of Venezuela. U.S. Venezuela tensions have escalated this year since Juan Guaido, leader of the opposition controlled National Assembly, invoked the Constitution to assume an interim presidency in January, arguing Socialist President Nicolas Maduro 2018 reelection was illegitimate. The United States and most Western democracies have recognized Guaido as the rightful leader. The Trump administration has said it prefers to continue to use sanctions and diplomacy to pressure Maduro to step down, but has not ruled out military action as an option. Cabello presides over the Constituent Assembly, a legislative super body loyal to Maduro, which is not recognized by the opposition. He is widely viewed as the second most powerful official in Venezuela's government after Maduro. The U.S. military accused a Venezuelan fighter aircraft of aggressively shadowing a U.S. Navy plane in international airspace over the Caribbean Sea on July 19th. Venezuela's government said the reconnaissance and intelligence aircraft had entered its space. The Pentagon did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Cabello's remarks. The National Assembly this week approved Venezuela's re entry into the Regional Defense Treaty the country left in 2013. Opposition hardliners had pressured Guaido to rejoin the treaty as a precursor to requesting foreign military assistance to oust Maduro, but Guaido has warned it was no magic solution. Maduro retains control over state functions and calls Guaido a U.S. puppet seeking to oust him in a coup. On Saturday, Maduro called the decision to join the treaty illegal and treasonous. Venezuela's Supreme Court on Friday ruled the reincorporation was null and that efforts to invoke the treaty would be considered a hostile act. Hmm. Regional Defense Treaty. I'm not very versed on that, but it sounds like it sounds like that's something that Chavez got out of at first. So I'm not all that versed on it. But I just find it interesting that people are going along with this. They're saying, yeah, Maduro should step down, and this guy Guaido should be able to take the mantle, take the throne from the rest of the country, even though the rest of the country, vote wise, doesn't even support him. But they're saying Maduro is a dictator, but who's the real dictator if the rest of the country doesn't support you and you're going to take control over the leadership? Doesn't make any sense. I just find that to be a little crazy. Anybody who wants to go with that guy would have to be crazy themselves because the consequences will be brutal if they catch you in the streets.
Guaido is kind of like um, he's the front man
Mhm.
for what other people are thinking. He's not actually the person who would be running the country if the U.S. took over. You know, when the U.S. take over, somebody else is going to be making those decisions. So he's just the front man, and
Right.
and if he's not in power, then the other person will say, "Hey, I didn't make any deals with you."
Hmm.
Guaido made the deals, and he's not here. So you know, that's the way it is.
Yeah, he'll go out the same way the Puerto Rican governor went out.
Oh yeah.
I think I think they're under the impression that people are just idiots and they'll accept anything.
Well, here, yeah, but Venezuela is a different story. You know, under the old system, the people used to accept anything because the military was on the side of um, up to when Chavez, when the people took Chavez from the military used to make the decisions for the country. To some extent, they still do, but now they know that some things the people are not going to accept. And if I might be in the military, but I still have a mother who is telling me, you know what, uh, the Chavista is giving our people education
Mhm.
before we didn't have education. Chavista are giving our people food before we didn't have food. You know, if I have a mother who is telling me these things, I have to listen, and that's what's going on right now. That's why the U.S. is finding it so difficult to take over so easily.
All right, let me get to this next one. It's from nationalinterest.org. Turkey stockpiled F-16 parts ahead of getting the Russian S-400 anti-air system. Let me explain this out. NATO member Turkey is determined to acquire ballistic missile technology and aims to co-produce the next generation of the S-400, the officials added. Citing discussions with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Erdogan said his country will take delivery of the S-400 within days. A Bloomberg report says Turkey has been stockpiling parts for the F-16 F-16s and other military equipment in anticipation of a U.S. sanction for acquiring the Russian S-400 air defense system. Two anonymous officials from Turkey who spoke to the news outlet refused to clarify on what types of spares were accumulated, how much was acquired, and how long can they last. Relations between the two countries deteriorated over the course of the Syrian civil war when the U.S. armed a Kurdish militia that Turkey views as a terrorist group, and in the aftermath of a 2016 coup attempt against Erdogan that his government blames on a Turkish imam residing in the U.S. NATO member Turkey is determined to acquire ballistic missile technology and aims to co-produce the next generation of the S-400. The officials added, citing discussions with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Erdogan said his country will take delivery of the S-400 within days. So this seems to be just them reiterating what was already said. Yeah, this is interesting. I I'm gonna go out on a stretch and say that Turkey may go the way of Iran when the Shah was in power, meaning that Turkey's dissatisfaction on the ground politically will lead to the overthrow not so much of the leadership but of dealings with the United States, because it seems to be really aimed at the United States and not so much at the European Union and other NATO partners. So with that being said, it seems that Turkey is looking for new friends and new alliances and not really so much on the West.
Look, Turkey. The the U.S. was warned that Turkey could go this way, and because it's hard to see um, things happening in the Middle East. If, first, you see Saddam got taken out, Tunisia, um, Algeria to some extent, um, Iran. They're going after Iran, Libya. You know, um, you see new partnerships being formed. At one time, Turkey was in a partnership with Israel. I don't know if you remember that.
This was the 90s.
Yeah, and then them and the Israelis had a falling out. You know, so when you see all these other Islamic countries around you falling, you got to look at yourself and say, hey, while the U.S. might like Turkey because of its strategic position, I, as the leader, I, they might take me out. And that's what Erdogan is looking at. Look what they did with Egypt. You know, it can happen in Istanbul too.
Hmm.
So he's just protecting himself. He's protecting his government, and
Well,
the Turkish people, whether they like it or not, some of them agree with him.
right.
So he's got to make all kind of plans, and with the Russians helping him, it's going to be difficult to kind of backdoor what he's doing. You know, if he was doing it on his own, it, the U.S. might be able to do an end run on him.
Hmm.
But with Russia and China helping him, advice, it's going to be more difficult. You
Hmm.
know, and you're saying the kind of parts that he would buy for that airplane, engines, the electronic equipment that control the weapon systems. That's what you need.
Fire and control systems.
Yep, you need those. You can manufacture to some degree. You can manufacture your own because Turkey has that capability. It's like what Iran had to do with their aircraft. You know, until they can manufacture their own variants, they had to produce the parts that fix their own aircraft.
Yeah, this would be in regards to the F-14 Tomcat.
Yep, and that airplane is a pretty good airplane too. It
Right.
was.
They still have it. I'm not sure exactly what they plan on doing with it. I think they only have like four left, and I think they stripped down one for spare parts. Maybe
Right,
so. Maybe it sounds to me like they stripped down the oldest one, the most vulnerable one,
right,
brought it down to bare bone for parts, and then they basically went from there. I mean, that's probably their best plane,
right,
which is the F-14,
right.
and it you can get your parts manufactured anywhere if
Oh
you
yeah,
if you have the facility capacity and the ability to I mean, with today, I don't know if you've seen it before, but they have scanners, 3D scanners that you can take. It fits in the palm of your hand like a gun. and you can
Right.
scan an object completely, all the way
Instantly.
around 360 degrees, and it will print onto a 3D printer.
Yeah. Look at it. You can buy the titanium, right?
Hmm.
For the hydraulic systems and other landing gear and all that. You can buy that from the Chinese.
Right.
The steel you can buy from the Chinese. Aluminum you can buy from the Chinese. All you need is a manufacturing facility. And some airlines, like American, say American Airlines in Dallas Fort Worth, they have a machine shop that's capable of manufacturing just about anything on any one of their airplanes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I've seen them where they can well they buy the fabric to fix the flaps and so forth, but you can make flaps. You know, all you need is a good oven, and you can make the flaps. You know, but any other part of the airplane you can make. You got the computer capability of getting it to microns within the tolerance range that you know. So they can remanufacture the airplane, and they can take out, say if they want to reproduce the F-14 variant, they can make one. But it makes sense to use the technology that they got from the drones that they shot down to make an airplane. So that's
Or
what they might be doing now.
what they could have probably have done, because maybe they were hurting for money at one point, they probably just sold the whole entire plane to the Chinese, and the Chinese gave them a nice large lump sum of money in exchange, and they probably rebuilt the plane and called it something different. Um, the Chinese have produced a couple of fighter jets that have not been given any NATO designations as of yet, from what I understand. But they said they look very similar to American planes, and I wonder where would they get that from, right? Um, Iran has the F5, the F5E, and the F-14, from my understanding. I think they had an F4 Phantom at one point.
The Phantom is Phantom is used for target practice now. They rebuild all the ones that we have, the U.S. have. They rebuild them and use them for target practice. You know, they put electronics in there that you can steer it from the ground, like a drone,
Right.
and then the pilots go up and attack them. So this all our older aircraft are used like that. Whereas the Chinese, what they do is they steal the technology, just like the Russians steal the technology, and you put in your own engines and your own electronics in it, and you
Hmm.
know, go from there. Because all you need is the airframe.
Right.
The airframe has been tested. You understand?
Hmm.
Because the U.S. tests their airframes. They test it for everything. You know, like the multi-role fighter they're trying to make now, the F-35. That thing has gone through, I mean, years and years of testing to get it exactly the way they want it. So when the Chinese steal the plans for that aircraft, they have an airframe that they know can take whatever turns and all that. All they need now is their engines and their electronics. Because you don't want to put the U.S. made electronics in there, because the U.S. know what to do with their electronics. You want to jam it or whatever the case might be, you know. So they have to put their own electronics in. So you got an airplane, and if they share, because Iran is now a partner in the Chinese, Russian, and soon Turkish coalition. So they might have the same technology as the Russian and Chinese, but the Chinese are going to give them technology, the Russians going to give them technology too. That's the way it's going to work. They might not get the best technology, but then they can improve on it as they see fit. You know, same way Israel does with the U.S. F-35. They buy the F-35 and they put their own electronics in, not U.S. electronics.
Makes sense. All right, let me go to next article from MSN News. India rethinks buying U.S. armed drones. Last month's downing of the U.S. Global Hawk drone by Iran in the Persian Gulf has prompted a rethink within the Indian military establishment, led by the Air Force, over the acquisition of American-made armed drones on the account of their cost and questions of their survivability. India's three services had planned to buy 30 drones from the U.S. at a cost of $6 billion, while the while the tri-services have not yet approached the defense minister for acceptance of necessity, or AON, to procure the drones. The plans were for the Air Force and the Army to acquire 10 Predator B drones each, and the Navy to buy long-distance surveillance versions. According to the military bases, to the military brass, the IAF has internally raised questions about an armed drone surviving in a contested airspace like over Pakistan occupied Kashmir, or along the line of actual control, the disputed de facto border between India and China, with both potential adversaries equipped with top of the line surface to air missile systems. The armed drone has been successfully used by US in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, and Syria, as the skies are dominated by their air force. Pakistan is the only country that has counter capabilities, but will think 100 times before it decides to take a US drone down by a surface to air missile or beyond visual range air to air missile, said a senior military commander of on condition of anonymity. The US's top of the line RQ-4 Global Hawk was shot down by Iran's S-300 missile system on June 20th in Persian Gulf airspace. The rethink of the U.S. drones has nothing to do with U.S. President Donald Trump's recent Kashmir mediation Fox Post. The Naran, Narendra Modi government has decided to cut out the Trump noise over Kashmir and concentrate on building India-U.S. ties for times to come. Trump said after meeting Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan earlier this month that Modi had asked him to mediate on the Kashmir issue, a claim India immediately and firmly denied. The other significant reason behind the Indian rethink is the prohibitive price of armed drones like the Predator B. According to the military establishment, the cost of a Bear drone platform will be to the tune of $100 million, and a full complement of weapons like laser-guided bombs or Hellfire missiles will cost another $100 million. This means that an armed drone with full complement of weapons will be more expensive than the Rafale multi-role fighter with all weapons and missiles on board. Under the circumstances, the IAF will give preference to acquiring more multi-role fighters with long-range air-to-air missiles, and the Indian Army will be looking towards replacing its dated T-72 tanks. The Indian the Indian Navy sends more surface combatants at sea rather than an armed drone for projecting itself as an Indo-Pacific power, said a senior South Bloc official. After the shooting down of a wing commander in uh, Vardaman's MiG-21 fighter by a Pakistan F-16 in an aerial skirmish on February 27th in the Rajouri sector, the Air Force has become interested in longer range air-to-air missiles, and the Army wants equipment for its battle groups like tanks and howitzers for a faster response to the Western adversary. When asked to comment on the drone acquisition plans, a senior defense ministry official said requesting and an enemy, that a decision on whether or not to acquire armed drones from the U.S. or any other country will only sorry will only be taken once the three services approach the government with a proposal. I don't see this happening at all. $100 million for a drone. Um, you're spending $6 billion on drones that's already been shot down by a weaker military. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You'd be better off buying, either new Russian Su-35 fighter jets or Su-34, or maybe a Su-30, or maybe even buying um, Saab Gripen fighter jets. I mean, they're even cheaper than that of the those stupid drones that just got shot down. I can't understand who would spend that kind of money on this. If you're India, um, you got aging hardware like the MiG-21. Why spend all that money on drones? Doesn't make any sense. Anybody else have anything you want to add to this?
No, not yet. I'm apologizing. So I just got in here. So, but yeah, I totally, I would agree with you as far as what they should buy if they're gonna. If you got these drones getting knocked out, getting knocked out, and they're $100 million. Yeah, a Gripen, even though a Gripen doesn't have the stealth technology that, let's say, some of the newer generation stuff has. I mean, that probably would be a better deal because it's a pretty effective dogfighter, I think, and then an aerial bomber. So yeah, I would go with something like that.
Yeah, the reason why I mentioned the Gripen is because for what India is trying to do, it fits right within their budget, and the ability to use short runways. It could take off from 100 yards,
Yep,
from 300 feet. That's actually really as a matter of fact, there's no fighter jet out there right now that can do that.
that can take off. They can't do it. The F-35 can do it, right?
No, the F-35 needs a lot more space than that to take off.
Mm,
It has vertical, it has the VTOL, right? So vertical takeoff and landing, but that's a different fighter jet. But if you're comparing an F-16 to a Gripen, actually, let me pull up the Gripen just because we're talking about it.
pretty capable aircraft.
It's very capable. That's why the Brazilians went with it.
Mm, it's a Swedish aircraft. It's pretty borderline, I think.
Hmm. That's why South Africa uses it too.
Yeah, it's not a stealth. It's not a stealth aircraft. So,
It really wouldn't need to be stealth because
yeah,
for what they're trying to do, uh, India has so many mountains that the Himalayas and whatnot that protect it from any sort of radar crosshairs. It probably wouldn't matter.
yeah. And if it flies snap of the earth,
Yeah.
like a lot of good fighters can do, yeah, it would be very hard to detect as well coming through there. True.
Hmm. All right. So this is a Saab Gripen that I was referring to, the Gripen E series, or at least the EF. So it says the Gripen EF is developed to counter and defeat most advanced threats in a modern battle airspace and continuously evolve in order to keep up with new challenges. We have built an intelligent fighter system. And the going, you got to mute yourself, please, brother.
I apologize. Go ahead, Fred. Go ahead.
We have built an intelligent fighter system that rapidly embraces new technology and tactics in a way that will always keep us ahead. That's why with Gripen EF, you are forever ahead. And um, I've seen this in air shows, at least on YouTube, and there's probably about a dozen countries that are running Saab Gripen fighter jets, including South Africa, and all seem to be very satisfied with it. Brazil made a conscious decision not to buy the American stuff and or the Eurofighter and bought the Gripen. So that speaks volumes about the Gripen's capabilities. Although it doesn't take off from an aircraft carrier, at least not the one that the Indians have, to my knowledge. But that's a picture of it. I'm glad I'm not in the military because I'd be on another level. It's a multi-role fighter jet, so it's similar to that of the F-35, with just without the stealth capabilities like Nagon was mentioning. Anyways, let me get to this next article. All right. All right, this next one is from Reuters.com. Britain tells Iran release ship to come out of the dark. I don't know. Sounds like an intervention there. Britain told Iran on Monday that if it wants to come out of the dark, it must follow international rules and release a British flag oil tanker seized by its forces in the Gulf. Iranian commandos seized the Sterner Imperial near the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most important waterway for oil shipments, on July 19th. That was 2 weeks after British forces captured an Iranian oil tanker near Gibraltar accused of violating sanctions on Syria. If the Iranians want to come out of the dark and be accepted as a responsible member of the international community, they need to adhere to the rules-based system of the international community. Foreign Secretary Dominique Raib told Sky News. You cannot go about detaining unlawfully foreign vessels. Tehran is angered by renewed sanctions imposed by the United States and what it sees as the future of the failure of Britain and European powers to protect it from fallout of Washington's withdrawal from a nuclear agreement between Iran and world powers. Under the 2015 deal, international sanctions on Iran were relaxed in exchange for Tehran curbing its nuclear program. Britain last week started sending a warship to accompany all British flag vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, a change in policy announced on Thursday after the government previously said it did not have the resources to do so. The Defense Ministry said on Sunday that a second warship, the HMS Duncan, had arrived in the Gulf to support the passage of a British flag ships through the straits, joining the HMS Montrose. Raib made his comments on Monday as Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards published footage purportedly showing the guards warning off a British warship during the seizure of the Stena Imperial. The video, published by the semi-official Tasnim news agency, contains footage of the captured of the capture of the tanker, showing guards abseiling onto the deck of the helicopter with the audio recording superimposed. Press TV, Iran's state-run English language news channel, identified the British warship mentioned in the exchange of as the Montrose. You are required not to interfere in these issues, the Guards Navy representative says. This is the this is British warship Foxtrot 236. I am in the vicinity of an internationally recognized strait with a merchant vessel in my vicinity conducting transit passage. A voice with a British accent replies. Don't put don't put your life in danger, the Guards Navy representative says. Hmm. This is this is interesting. If they took it in the face of the British and they did nothing about it, that is a big red flag. That means there are some chinks in the armor that the British are not ready for a fight. They don't have the resources, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the bandwidth. The British are just not 100% down um, with this whole entire thing. And the fight would actually um, would actually put them on their back heels because a couple of a couple of warship cruise missiles would take out those frigates that they do have in those waters. I mean, I don't know. I know Britain. Their navy needs a big revamping. Um, they are not they are not in the state that they need to be in for a war. And I would argue that they probably would never in a good state since 1945, since Churchill. Because when they had the Falklands War, they got their asses handed to them big time by the Argentine military. So with that being said, that was the real last major conflict that the British have had under Margaret Thatcher, um, and that proved to be almost a disaster if it wasn't for the incompetence of the military of Argentina. They would have taken out the British military almost single handedly.
They almost took them out with one Exocet missile.
Hmm.
Almost knocked out their whole naval command right there with one missile, with one, and had them on the heels, had them reeling. But the Argentines were so incompetent
Hmm.
and so bullcrap. They didn't really have any. I mean, they're a corrupt country, so they didn't have anything going.
They relied on the French to actually come in and help them.
They thought the French would come and help them. They thought the Americans would come in and help them as well. And then America would come in and support them as well because that was they were their part that was close to their territorial waters and everything else like that. So they would have a friend in America, and we left them swinging in the breeze.
That's interesting because one of the things I did read before was that the Argentine military was going to get help from either Brazil or another South American state, that they were going to actually join in and partake if the battle was to come on to land, if it was going to be a land warfare battle, that there was another country that was going to get involved. I want to say it was Brazil. I have to do my research on that because I think that we should actually sit down and do an analysis on the Falklands War because that's a very important war, man.
There was a lot of talk. Brazil understood that it was part of its territorial area, so Brazil was saying they would protect their territory during that famous if a foreign army or a foreign force came up on to their soil. Because if you look at kind of where they were, you kind of have to kind of cross, in some respects, cross Brazilian space in which to thoroughly engage Argentina in a land war if that was going to happen. Which no one really believed that it was going to happen because they didn't believe that Argentina was going to even withstand um, Britain um, in the Falkland Island War. I think it was withstand it. They didn't. But there was talk about that. But I think it was more talk than anything else. I don't believe that was ever going to happen. I don't believe that was ever going to happen. I don't believe it was ever going to come to a land war because that's not what um, Britain was preparing for. I remember this quite well because I remember this watching all this on TV unfold and a lot of the stuff that was being talked about. So I was just listening to this stuff. It's like, wow, check this out. But yeah, it almost looked like it was an important war, but it looked kind of like a joke because it just looked like Argentina, and Britain was just trying to find an enemy to bring its military to show that it still had military might. So it looked like a country like Great Britain that really did have a military power for a while there, beating up on a small country that wasn't really able to really protect itself the way England was, and England still got a bloody nose in that conflict. What actually made it look a lot more vulnerable than it ever should have been, with the Sheffield getting blasted out of the water and slowing British forces down. Um, it made them look bad. The Argentine army was there; didn't even have enough food, and they were sitting on the Falkland Island, literally eating cats and stuff like that. They they weren't even properly supplied, so it's a pretty pitiful ground effort um, on Argentina. They just didn't have a military act together at all to properly defend. That's why they were trying to call on other countries to help them. But you know, but really, Britain, they got a bloody nose where they felt they shouldn't have, where they felt that they shouldn't have even lost a ship or anything, and when that happened pretty early in the war, it actually made people nervous because they thought that Argentina could actually mount, a reasonable defense and possibly even rout them. Um, that's really how that really played out. But as far as a real ground war or anything happening, that was a lot of talk. That definitely wasn't going to go down. I didn't think they were even going to come close to them to that, and it never did.
Hmm. All right, let me get to this next article. This one is from Forbes.com. There's no real reason to sanction Russia anymore. Other than just hating Russia because it's, well, run by super barn villain Vlad Putin, there is no reason to sanction Russia anymore. Market rumors of Senate hawks like Marco Rubio hitting Russian government and quasi-sovereign bonds with sanctions have been around ever since Trump took the oath of office. Let me expand this out. But now that the special counsel investigation is over and the only thing Robert Mueller could find involving Russians that was worth punishing were these 13 troll farms that had no impact on the election outcome and whose participants will never see a U.S. court or prison. Russia, for Wall Street anyway, has been exonerated. The Mueller testimony was, as one hedge fund manager put it, a total face plant for the Democrats and anyone looking to link Trump to a villainous Russia. This story is officially over as a market mover. On the day Mueller testified before Congress about his 400 plus page report about the Trump campaign and the Russians, the Van Eck Russian RSX exchange traded fund had already been dumped the night before, going from a trading volume of over 6 million shares to 4.2 million on Wednesday. By Friday, RSX volume rose to 5.5 million shares, hitting $23.64 per share. Year to date, Russia is the hottest performing emerging market. The Van Eck ETF is up 26%, while number two, Brazil, is up 18.9%, and the MSCI emerging markets benchmark is up 9.3%. Since the summer of 2014, Russian oil and gas firms and Russian banks have been sanctioned by the U.S. and to some extent Europe, though Europe did not sanction oil and gas entities. These, these sanctions were all due to Russian involvement in a separatist movement in East Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine, remember that country. Once Trump was elected, Ukraine based sanctions quickly turned to punishing Russia for electing Trump via election meddling, which, as Mueller defined in his report, meant Russian companies that may or may not have ties to the official government in Moscow spent a few $100,000 on Facebook ads, half of which ran after the election. Election meddling became part of a new sanctions law and a law that required an act of Congress to remove rather than an executive order by Trump. At that time, or at the time, less than a year into Trump's presidency, nearly every Democrat and enough Republicans believed Trump was compromised by Russia. At the same time, Russia's insistence on railroading Washington's favorite pastime in the Middle East, regime change, this time in Syria, also got used as another reason for sanctions. We went from Ukraine to Trump and Syria as a reason to keep tightening the screws on Russian oil and gas companies like Gazprom and the state-owned banks led by Cyberbank. Both are the lifeblood of Russia's commodity-heavy economy. For many in the market, there was a real risk that an angry Congress would eventually make it impossible for American investors to own Cyberbank bonds, or maybe even Cyberbank equities through funds like VanEck. Few wanted to talk about it. Now that the election meddling story is over and the special counsel investigation is complete, the only thing that remains a real threat to Russia are Ukraine and Syria. Ukraine has a new government now, one that is not anti-Putin as former President Petro Poroshenko. Syria could pick up steam again, and Russia will back its leader Bashar al-Assad. But barring U.S. and Russian military colliding somehow, there is nothing new on that front to irk sanction-loving lawmakers. The conclusion, the conclusion of the Mueller investigation reduces the urgency for the U.S. Congress to impose additional sanctions on Russia, says Federico Kwan, head of emerging markets fixed income at UBS Asset Management. Uh, Actually, his name is Cohn, or Cohn. Cohn warns that Russian ruble valuations are stretched now that investors doubt deeper sanctions. Of course, there is always the risk of a surprise on the sanctions front. One cannot discount the fine arts of statecraft causing a ruckus here and there, or Russia somehow running afoul of Iranian sanctions, even as Trump is showing signs that he wants to talk with the Iranian government, not unlike his desire to talk with the North Korean government. In other words, barring a geopolitical surprise out of Ukraine, unlikely, Syria possible, and Iran possible, sanctions escalation against Russian corporates is over. This is a serious headwind removed from Russian investment outlook. The Russian economy has managed to manage its current sanctions bottleneck. The good news for Russia is that it will not have to figure out a way to live with new ones anytime soon. We are taking on more exposure to Russia, says Asha Mehta, a fund manager with Acadian in Boston. The concerns around investor sentiment has become much more muted. There's value, there's value there now, and the risk level out of Russia is a bit more benign. Russia has still. Let me just stop this real quick. For those of you listening in the chat, Russia doesn't have any debt. It actually cleared out its debt a few years ago, back in 2011, I think, or 2012. So as it stands right now, Russia is actually in a good position despite all the sanctions and despite all of the um uh let me wrench your Don Calypso.
Don C, what's up? Don Calypso, what's up, baby? Long time no see.
Yeah. Um Russia has no debt, so therefore it's not really hurting in the same way that the media would make it look out to be. Russia paid off his debts a few years ago, and financially speaking, yeah, their markets are hurting because there's sanctions on them. However, the black market is actually doing relatively good for them, because now the bootleggers can make out like a bat out of hell. They're making out like a fat rat at a cheese factory. All right. Yeah, Don Calypso, you're right about the A4 Skyhawks and the British. But even still, any surface to air missile right now can take out any of those jets that they do have in stock right now. I mean, we saw what happened in Belgrade in 1999 when the F114 Nighthawk or F117 Nighthawk was taken out by one of those Russian missiles off the ground. They thought that thing was stealth, and it really was not stealth. The Serbs actually figured out who it was, and went in there and took it out. They said once it crossed the lethal zone, it was game over.
Yeah, and that was with Russian technology that knocked it out.
Hmm.
And I believe didn't the Chinese get some of those pieces and sort of re-engineer that aircraft there in China somewhere?
Everybody did. The Russians did
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, the parts for that airplane were sold to the highest bidder. Serious. I remember that.
Facts. Like I was watching a one of these military programs where they had done a flyover of China, and they actually were able to peer down into a hangar where they saw a mock-up copy of the F 117 Nighthawk there in China. And they were like, "What's this doing here?" And apparently, they had all the technology, those pieces that were retrieved, in Serbia were sold off. Yeah, so it went to the highest bidder. Yeah, and they actually had a mock-up that plane. They mocked it up. They re-engineered and built it in China. It was sitting there, and then they had a they saw it. It's crazy. Yeah.
Well, the Serbs wouldn't have been able to do anything with it anyways. It's not like, I mean, they're sitting in the middle of Europe. They wouldn't have been able to export it. They wouldn't have been able to um, manufacture it on their own. They were under attack, and have been bombed to crap pretty well by NATO powers. So it was probably in their best interest to sell that sucker off as soon as they can.
Oh, for sure. Oh, that's for sure. But the Serbs were also being backed up by Russia.
Yeah,
So
they still
so
are.
yeah, absolutely. So so that's where that went. And so and then Russia had it and shared it with China and so forth. So you know you know how the story goes and old military information on various weapon systems. That once somebody gets a piece of something, it's kind of game over, or at least levels the playing field.
Yeah, I want to say it was shot down by a Buk missile, if I remember correctly. if not a Buk, it may have been an S-200 missile.
But 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 the myth of the aircraft being totally stealth and you could just roll through and do your thing, that was not. That showed that that was really not the case.
If you guys look, I mean, I know you guys probably looked at this before or thought about it before, but if you look at technology and aircraft or ships, you can see that there's no such thing as stealth. I'm serious because um, if you look at aircraft uh, as they fly, you are generating lots of different types of information. Um, your heat signature is one. You
But
know,
but really, they're just trying to
depending
get they're
on the
trying to get that
airplane.
they're trying to get that radiation band. When they shoot out that radar, they're trying to get a signal that flat that comes back off of what they're hitting. Which, if you are stealthy and you have radar absorbing paint, you also have radar. You have the shape of a stealth craft that's not going to give you back a solid signature. You are going to get a smaller profile. You can sneak through. It just all depends on how kind of critical your systems are. It's another technology war. It's another arms race. Because you'll have to be able to perceive that through the type of new instrumentation that you've developed to detect. If you don't have that, then you're going to be more stealthy to the most
Yeah.
up to
Okay.
date you're going to be seen. So I just think it just comes down to the technology that people may have. So I
The
think
goal.
step. Go ahead.
You didn't let me finish what I was saying.
Oh, I'm sorry, fam.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, fam. I'm
Yes.
sorry, fam.
Compared to a civilian airplane that paints a picture like the sun, you know, a smaller military airplane, depending on the configuration, the paint, all that, you're seeing a smaller radar signature. However, that airplane produces a heat signature. That airplane is always talking to the ground. It is always talking. It is always transmitting. No matter it doesn't. The pilot might not be speaking, but the aircraft itself is talking to the ground all the time, continuously. The next thing is that it has a heat signature. And the other thing, it has a weight. You have to disturb the atmosphere no matter what you do. No matter what, I don't care. You have to be moving so slowly that it looks like a cloud.
Or they do have electromagnetic pulse waves that can actually disrupt around the air and show very
It,
very little signature. Or
it
they
makes
have
a lot of. I
or
don't
or,
mean
No
to. I don't,
matter,
oh,
or,
go
no
ahead. Go
or,
matter.
ahead.
or also with the with the like with the F-17 and some of the newest stealth technology with those graded kind of exhaust pipes now that are, I think, charcoal and something else they have in there that keeps the heat signature down as well. There are ways to make the plane less detectable. There's no such thing as a pure stealth fighter that's going to fly through and not be seen. It's just, will it look like a plane, or will something look like a bird flying through? Well, if it's a
Yeah,
pack
but
of birds, we're not going to worry about it. Okay, but if it's given a signature off as a plane, it's something else. So I think that's what we're really talking about here. There's no such thing as a pure stealth fighter. I mean, we kind of know that where you can't be detected. Though I do think that they're saying that this Aurora that's out here right now that has EM pulse wave technology can fly at Mach 9 or 10 or something really crazy, where this plane could travel, 20, 15, 20,000 miles an hour, something crazy like that. Um, and is exceedingly hard to detect with its stealth technology and extraordinary speed. Um, this may be another generation of a plane that might be harder to detect, though it may not be undetectable, but it may be harder to detect. And by the time
you,
you
you,
detect it, it may have already delivered its ordnance and done its damage that it has to do. And I think that's what this thing is really all about.
But
Um,
nobody today uses a 1940 radar system. Nobody. I
well,
mean, you have to be like I would say, not even Barbados uses a standard radar signature, except looking at civilian aircraft. You know what I'm saying? So for radar, this what they call stealth is comparing something that is to a blip, which is a standard radar system. I know what I'm talking about.
yeah, I
I
understand the
did,
technology very well myself. I understand it very well.
I did this as what's called secondary study in my electronics. So
I understand it very well.
they're taking people's mental thinking and telling them about stealth technology and what they're talking about. Say you can't see this with a regular radar, and nobody's military uses a regular radar.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's
So,
true.
so they're fooling public.
Well,
Well,
we're not even talking about so much of public. I think we're looking at, we're talking about radar. We're talking about more advanced radar systems and other types of systems that out here that some of these aircraft and so forth are dealt or are designed to compromise to a degree.
Right,
You're never going to be invisible.
right.
Okay,
You're
right?
always trying to
You're
fool
never
the
going to be
radar.
invisible.
You're
Yeah,
trying to fool the radar either by
to
jamming it.
fool the radar,
Right,
exactly, to jam it, or EM technology, M waves, which
exactly. Yeah,
will block so you can't see it. You know what
right.
I'm saying? And that still
Or
will give
absorb it,
somewhat, radar absorbent. Okay,
or you can
soup,
retransmit. You can
soup,
retransmit, right?
exactly.
You can take it and send it in another direction.
And then give a false reading to where it's at a different place where it isn't.
Exactly.
They have all kind
Yeah.
of ways to try to fool a system.
Right.
But there is no such thing
That's stealth.
as something disappearing and
Yeah.
not being seen. I do believe
Yeah.
this new aircraft. I do believe that this Aurora that they say is not out there is the biggest,
Well, it's
secret that
speed.
everybody knows.
Right. That's speed.
Is extraordinarily fast and rather stealthy and a very dangerous aircraft. Very
But
dangerous.
you put it
but
in another you put it in another category because now you're disturbing the atmosphere.
There's also
Not
the
only
atmosphere
are you
disturbing.
disturbing the atmosphere, but you're creating heat. At that speed, you're creating a heat signature.
Yeah, and they have ways of trying to
Signature.
dissipate the heat. But what you want to do is you want to block certain things because there are a lot of things that create heat in the atmosphere. Now, can an aircraft be able to dissipate its heat signature in such a way where you can't fully read it as an aircraft? I remember.
he,
I think if you guys remember the movie Hunt for October, where now we're talking about being in the sea, but some of the technology is somewhat similar with their Caterpillar system, which really was like a jet engine underwater, but yet you couldn't really detect it by normal means. But how did they really detect it? Well, you had to detect it by way of a magma displacement. So it had to read
Right.
as something else that was
Right.
kind of anomalous for you to see it. So that's
he,
really all we're talking about. I don't know if we could get past certain kind of countries like China or like Russia who are technically very savvy, where we may not be able to get away with it. We might or we might not, depending on what we know and what they know about us. We might be able to play certain types of games, but very technically advanced cultures that are dealing with this stuff can may make it more difficult. But one that might be a little bit less, you might be able to get over a little bit better. So
yeah,
I think that's what we're talking about. Anyway, I'm done. Go ahead, guys.
no, I was just gonna say that keep in mind that the Russian S-400 and S-500 can detect objects the size of a football at any rate of speed. That's how advanced their radar systems are.
Right,
So it doesn't matter if it's a F-35 or a B-2, it can see anything. And plus, they don't just use the radars on the ground; they use satellites to track all these
Exactly.
objects.
Mm,
So they know where it took off from, and they know where it is at all times.
mm.
So you
Well,
really can't get away from most of the technology that they do have now.
well,
Now,
at least that's what they say. Because what we're really working on and what we might have that really might cloak or cloaking devices, as I've heard them talk about it in the military sector. We don't know what that technology looks like,
mhm.
and it may be deployed right now, and you will have no idea of it. So I'll just leave it at that. Now I've got a friend. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. That's my roommate from college. So I talk to dudes that are my friends that are very high up in the game. And they ain't no staff sergeants or whatever. These dudes are colonels, lieutenant colonels, players, real players, and
Yeah,
and they understand a great deal of what's going on, and they speak on some of this stuff that's highly advanced, but they don't let you know as to what's going on because I don't have any level of security clearance,
well,
but they are clear at the highest levels, and they shit out there they're messing with that we have no idea about. So
yeah,
I'll leave it at that. Anyway, go ahead.
yeah. They use acoustics as well. So I mean,
Yeah.
they we had F. We was out over the weekend and they had F-22s flying over Boston, and you can hear them suckers from miles away coming in. Um, so they make so much noise, and even if you can't see them, they make so much noise coming in at that speed. Most basic radar systems would pick that up.
If they're moving supersonically and you're moving past the sound wave and you
Mhm,
fly through, the plane will be through and you'll hear the boom, you hear the sound of the plane, but it's already gone. I remember just experiencing that in New York City some years ago after
mhm,
9/11, where they were flying across the sky supersonically and you would hear these booms literally, and you wouldn't see the plane; it would already gone.
mhm,
But yeah, I mean, we're talking all that. It's really hard to really say because I do know for a fact that there are technologies that we're working on right now that are almost science fiction that these guys are working on at this stage
mhm.
that we're not really fully aware of.
All right, this next one is from DefenseMaven.io. U.S. Navy made plans for a secret undersea lair. Would the article go? The This was the U.S. Navy's plan for a secret undersea lair. But as a his, but as history has proven, De, you're gonna have to mute yourself, please, brother. But as history has proven time and again, even the weirdest fantasies have their real life counterparts, and those who dive for the Atlantean gold sometimes surface with treasure. There really were and are some strange ideas deep down in the sea. Point Sur is 600 feet of tough rock facing Pacific rollers that come 6,000 miles to pound the central Californian coast. Like the 19th century lighthouse that marks the point, the now the relic compound of the former Navy facility Point Sur evokes another era, and it evokes a mystery, one evolving secret underground naval bases, high-tech submarines, and Cold War nuclear brinksmanship. As late as the 1960s, Navy technicians and their families at Point Sur monitored undersea listening posts used to track Soviet subs. According to one legend, it wasn't merely hydrophones the Navy ran from Point Sur, but submarines themselves based in a giant man made caverns dug into the rock. There is something mythic and compelling about seashore scarps in naval bases, something drawing on archetypal imagery of treasure concealed in cave waters open to the sea. The ultimate supervillain's lair, after all, is an island base with undersea access. But as history has proven time and again, even the weirdest fantasies have their real life counterparts, and those who dive, why is it repeating the same statements? Dive dive for Atlantean gold, sometimes surface with treasure. There really were and are some strange ideas deep down in the sea. By 1966, the two surges into outer space and inner space were at their flood tide, while NASA gathered even more momentum with monthly Gemini flights and a new mission control. The success of Sea Lab 2 and the Conshelf 3 underwater habitat led to Presidential Commission on Oceanography and a bigger undersea commitment. The Navy's efforts to recover a lost hydrogen bomb off the coast of Spain that year, and the loss of an attack sub USS Thresher 3 years before had brought new funding and discipline to deep submergent systems. In such heavy times, dreams of colonizing the continental shelf within a generation sober seem like sober predictions. It was in this environment that C.F. Austin of the China Lake Naval Ordnance Test Station proposed the rock site concept, manned undersea installations excavated into the rock of the sea floor. By applying well understood principles employed for decades by the mining industry, Austin proposed that large bases could be constructed and operated anywhere suitable bedrock occurred in the ocean at any depth. Austin realized that even with mid 1960s technology, it would be possible to sink a wide shaft into the sea floor, seal and drain it, then use it as a staging area for further excavation. A tunnel boring machine could be lowered into the shaft in pieces and then assembled to bore out more tunnels, including one of a small modular nuclear reactor, much like those Camp Century in Greenland and McMurdo Basin in Antarctica. There's very little hype in Austin's report. The bulk of it is taken up with documentation of tunneling methods and mining operations conducted under the seafloor. These often follow seams and drifts underground as they continue offshore. According to Austin, one Nova Scotia mine, Dominion's coal Dominion Coal's Cape Breton operation consisted of a complex of many consolidated undersea mines ranging in depth from 200 to 2,700 feet below the sea floor, with a water cover of 60 to 100 feet. These mines span in an area approximately 75 square miles and presently employ some 4,100 men in an undersea workings. Among the benefits of rocksite, Austin noted its immunity to weather and currents, its its shirt sleeve environment, and its very controlled access. And Austin was not thinking small. Structures within the sea floor can easily be made large and comfortable enough to permit the quartering of crews and the families for extended periods of time, he wrote, and can be made large enough to serve as supply and repair depots for large submersibles. Interesting. Recent research on hardened missile basins concepts have proven various techniques for creating submarine-sized structures in hard substrates. The Air Force's development of underground silos, subways, and central commands reduce real-world hardware and experience with construction techniques. In the 1970s, Los Alamos National Lab investigated an atomic rock drilling concept called the nuclear subterrane, which, like rock site, sounds like something out of Johnny Quest, but also really happened. One wonders what might have happened had the Navy put its nuclear expertise to work drilling holes in the ocean floor. The rock site concept also bore much in common with NASA's designs for underground moon bases. Very likely, all three concepts, invulnerable bastions, space outposts, and ocean bases, would have shared solutions to issue ranging from environmental control to crew morale. Austin foresaw that rock site bases could be ideal for industrial uses such as fossil fuel production and deep sea mining. In the decades since Austin's study, industry has created the tools, the tools needed, or should say need, the tools needed to realize his vision. Though it's not autonomic powered, the world's largest tunnel boring machine is about to drill a 2 mile long tunnel beneath Seattle, wide enough to hold an Ohio class sub. That is something, man. Um, this is something, man. I don't know about you all, but that's some. I mean, they were thinking about that back then.
The guy has already said he's telling you that they did it without saying it in the book. And
Mm.
I pretty much sure I know where two of them are located. I've never been in it. I've never been sitting at the door to say, yeah, I saw it. But I'm pretty sure I can tell you where to find two of them. And one is in South America.
Mhm. That's something, man. That is really, really something. It because it takes a lot of money and manpower to do something like that. It's not something that's cheap. It's not like they're gonna hide out. I mean, the Japanese. Remember during World War II, they had their um their version of the ME 262. Is it 262 or 261? Their version of the German fighter jet tucked away inside the mountains as an air base.
NATO has got a mountain base. They fly aircraft out of it in Europe. You never heard of it?
I heard of one. I thought that they shut down one.
They don't shut down things like that.
Yeah, they. I thought you safety. I
They
thought you
don't shut
safety.
down things like that.
I thought you safety
You safety
had.
is you safety is part of NATO.
It's a part of NATO.
I was part of you safety. Oh, sorry.
I thought that they had a base built into the mountains as well. I mean, I was aware of this, so
Yeah.
yeah. This is kind of nothing new, you know. I mean, this is kind of what we do. I think.
You safety is part of NATO.
Yeah.
Part of
That's
it.
it.
So it's like me, just on my ID, I can go anywhere I want in any European country except across the border. And one of my partners, he went across to East Germany and got the big shit trouble. Anyway, but there are these they have built these. You understand that the U.S. builds um, what the rest of the world really only thinks about, and now China is doing the same thing. China is doing the same thing,
Yeah,
and the Russians really are too.
yeah.
The Russians have begun to think in that way. They're thinking, we are not going to attack you, but if you attack us, you will never survive. And that's the way the U.S. Thinks. But the U.S. will attack you. You
Yeah, but
understand? They choose the target. U.S. We will choose our target based on what we think you could become, the threat that we think you could become to us in the future, or an economic threat. Those are the two reasons that I've seen the U.S. choose target:
yeah,
the potential in the future and the current economic threat.
yes, and that's part. And we tend to target nations that are considerably weaker than us. Um, we don't like going head to head with those that can really give us a fight because we don't know how that may come out.
Right.
All right, let me get to this next one. This one is from foreignaffairs.com. How to confront an advancing threat from China. Speaking of threats, getting tough on trade is just the first step. The most important international development of the last 2 decades has been the rise of China as a great economic and military power. As China transformed, many Western scholars and policymakers predicted that economic reform and integration into the world economy would force the country to liberalize politically and become a responsible stakeholder in the international system. The idea, sometimes called convergence theory, was that as China grew wealthier, it would become more like the United States. The theory was comforting, but it did not pan out. China grew economically without democratizing. Instead, its government became more ideological and repressive, with military ambitions that are not just regional and defensive, but global and designed to intimidate. And as the distinction between civilian and military technology gradually eroded across the globe, China President Xi Jinping made it official policy for Chinese companies to put all technology at the disposal of China's military. As the Princeton University scholar Aaron Freeberg has written, what Xi Jinping and his colleagues have in mind is not a transitional phase of authoritarian rule to be followed by eventual liberalization, but in an effort, but an efficient, technologically empowered, and permanent one-party dictatorship. Let's face it, she has killed the notion of convergence. China is enormously important to the United States for reasons both positive and negative. American companies highly prize its huge market, which is a crucial engine of growth for the world economy. But as we cannot, but we cannot allow our strong interest in good economic relations with China to blind us to Beijing's hostile political intentions. The Chinese government defines itself as a foe of Western liberal democracy and the upholder of its own brand of communist nationalism. Its strategic ambitions are unfriendly, far-reaching, and deeply rooted in an authoritarian worldview. Americans Americans look with deep regret on the choices Chinese leaders have made. For decades, the United States strove to cultivate friendship. Presidents Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan both worked to forge cooperative ties through the transfer of high, and that's where the article stopped because it's behind a paywall. But essentially, what the article is saying is that China's rise in economic empowerment has made them a very vicious threat because now they're able to fund a military that is almost comparable to that of the United States maybe 20 years ago. And I would argue that they're not that far behind since they're stealing a lot of the technology.
Well, you can't really, begin to ascend and begin to coalesce your hegemony without being a very strong military um,
Hmm.
threat as well. You have to have a strong military
Hmm.
in which to project power. So China's going right along with other very powerful nations and empires that we've seen in the past. So I think they're going they're following right along those lines. Would you agree, De?
Yeah, I agree with you, but I think they're going about it in a somewhat different manner than
Mm-hmm.
empires in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Roman Empire came in with brute force. Um, America, to some degree, used brute force and stealth because they didn't win World War II by just brute force. What they
No,
did
no.
was they let Europe destroy itself,
I
and
think I
then
think
they came in.
I think the Roman Empire, with how they really became very powerful, was they not only just used brute force, but they built a very strong trading network, and they had
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot
yeah.
of and they had a lot of very strong trading alliances around all around the world, where they didn't have to project as much military power, but yet had very strong trade routes that dealt almost all around the world, where they say all roads lead to Rome after a period of time, because of their very strong um, economic and trading connections that helped extend their empire as well. They didn't have to necessarily use their army, and I kind of I'm looking at kind of looking at China, kind of doing the same thing. You know, Rome. Some of Rome's biggest problems they had was really trying to expand deeply into Europe, and of course, with a lot of military power there, that after a while, took them out. But Rome, if you look at how Rome really expanded, it wasn't all just through sheer military might. Though they had a very strong military, and that gave it its respect. But people certainly wanted to trade with the Roman state, and I kind of see some of the same things kind of going on with China. Do I think China's a bit more sophisticated in how they're operating? I see them operating very much the same way, very very similarly, but definitely not as aggressive militarily, which I think is the smart move from them, which is giving them a different look. But they're going to have a strong military to back up if they have to.
Well, you and I disagree on this on the Roman thing because everywhere you went, everywhere if you go in the Roman Empire, uh, you will see that Rome had an army that
Oh yeah,
it,
they
oh, they
garrisoned a lot. They did.
right, exactly the garrison.
Yeah,
They put a
they garrisoned a
garrison
lot.
in your country, even during peacetime.
Yeah,
Even though they were at peace with you, they had a garrison in your country.
they did.
Right,
They definitely garrisoned. I would not
right,
sit down and say that they did not do that. And
right.
I'm not really trying to suggest that either. I think what I am saying is they didn't go to war in areas as much as we would like to say that they did. What really hurt Rome more so than anything else was they had such far-flung empires, and to keep them going and to provision them and to keep their far-flung enterprise moving, they spent more money than they really had, and that's what took them out. At the end of the day.
Okay. But China doesn't do that.
Right.
China, what China is doing is actually they're building a military, yes, but and they're building a strong military in case that they have to fight to keep what they have if
Right.
they get
Right.
attacked. But what they're doing is actually they're killing you economically. What they're doing is moving in economically, and they're while they you can't have two strong um, economies face to face, and one don't blink, and one is not going to lose. So what China is staying face to face with America, knowing that empires fall. They know empires fall. This is history. No
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
empire
Right.
will remain. So China is saying we're going to be there when you fall. We are going to be in the position to take over automatically, and we're building our military just in case we decide to go. Because all empires, when they start to fall, they use their military. I
To,
mean,
to,
it,
to try to
it,
gain some type of advantage. Yeah,
exactly,
and we know how a lot of that goes. And yeah,
exactly.
but economic warfare is a part of war. It's actually part of
Yep.
warfare. So
It is
it's
the real war.
and
It's
and and,
actually the real
and,
war.
and Sun Tzu talks about this in wonderful
Yep.
detail in his book.
Oh
But
yeah.
um but yes, I definitely see China I see them moving very much as a very as a smart but typical rising hegemony that America is aware of, and their question is how are they going to stop it at some point in time, and that's the big question. I think
You,
we know what we're coming to at some point in time.
you had some little nations, and one of them. Oh shoot! I don't even know how to use this because the people, today's people want to use that to their credit, and they had nothing at all to do with it. But if you watch it, there's a people that they were in Egypt, and they were not. They tried to make it look like they call themselves. Oh man, I hate to use this word, Jews, but they're not the people of today. But they were in Egypt, and what they did was they infiltrated the country's ruling elite. In Egypt, they did it. In Babylon, they did it. In Persia, they did it. In Assyria, they did it. In Rome, they did it. In Europe, they did it after Rome fell. The same people infiltrating one, um, ruling one empire after the other, rising up through the rulership class, and then dismantling. What they did was, like, when one empire is falling, they made a deal with the next coming upcoming empire. And if you look at history, you will see this going on throughout history. Um, I haven't seen it yet in China, but I think it is there. I don't know if you've seen this, Nago. I don't know if you've seen it for yourself, but that's the way I see history. There's another part of history that people don't talk about, and that part that I just mentioned is part of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I look at it. I've read the books on the definitive history of the Roman Empire and all that. I've read all that stuff, and I've looked at a lot of things. I've tried to simplify a lot of stuff with all these various battles and internecine conflicts and so forth. It just seems to come down to yeah, military power plays a big role, but yet if you overextend your empire, you overreach. As time goes on, it becomes far more expensive to keep a very far-flung empire going than not, and you make certain kind of economic mistakes, and ultimately you fall. And
Yeah,
that's
but
just how it happens.
The
You know,
Romans were good at the
you
Romans were good at technical things. They could build a great battle tank to say. They could real they could they had excellent military maneuvers, but they weren't the economic men.
well,
And
well,
the
well,
same thing with
well, well, well,
The Muslims were
the economic problems they had were the fact that they were once again an overextended empire. I look at the United States very much as being, in many respects, overextended. That's a large part of what we talk about when we look at Bretton Woods and so forth. Um, to see that why we came off the gold standard and everything else like that, because with our extended projects and our extended you know expenditures, we had to come with another economic system, to play, because we didn't have the money.
but guess what?
We'd have the goal to cover it. So I'm just saying, we in some respects we're looking very similar to that, and let's look at a country like Russia that's having no debt, and China that's carrying less of a debt service. That's a problem.
Yeah,
That's a
but
problem.
if you look at the two, right?
So so
The
I'm but you follow where I'm coming from, right?
Yeah, I see. I see.
That's my main point here. All right. Anyway, go ahead.
I really need to get to this next
Yeah, go.
article.
Okay, okay.
All right, next one is from foreignaffairs.com. Japan and South Korea can't get along. Why America needs to help its allies mend fences. Since late last year, a conflict has been steadily building between two of the United States' closest Asian allies. Last fall, the South Korean Supreme Court ruled in favor of a dozen plaintiffs seeking compensation from Japanese firms that used forced Korean labor during World War II. Relations between the two countries have been deteriorating ever since. Japan is now poised to remove South Korea from its whitelist of trusted countries for trade in sensitive materials, a decision that would hurt both countries' economies and disrupt global supply chains in the high tech sector. South Korea, meanwhile, is threatening to withdraw from an intelligence sharing agreement with Japan that facilitates security cooperation between the two key U.S. allies. Seoul and Tokyo have quarreled in the past, but their current feud has serious implications for U.S. interests in Asia. Left unresolved, tension between Japan and South Korea could not only damage the global economy, but undermine the Trump administration's policy towards North Korea and the Indo-Pacific. And yet, the White House has shown little interest in mediating the dispute. Continued indifference would be a major mistake. The United States strategy in Asia depends on trilateral cooperation with Japan and South Korea. It should make resolving the conflict between the allies a priority. Japan and South Korea might seem to be unlikely antagonists. The countries are democratic and developed neighbors with deep economic ties, common external threats, and close alliances with the United States. But although Seoul and Tokyo normalized relations in 1965, a stable partnership has remained elusive on account of their dark history. Japan colonized Korea from 1910 to 1945. During World War II, Japan forced Koreans into labor and sexual slavery. They were ill. South Korea perceives Japan as showing little contrition for these past abuses. Japan, meanwhile, is frustrated with a demand for apologies and reparations that it sees as insatiable. The current dispute began last fall. The South Korean Supreme Court upheld lower court rulings ordering Japanese firms to pay around $90,000 in damages to each of a dozen people who claim they had endured forced labor. The court further declared the entire colonial period illegal. The Japanese government rejected the rulings. In 1965, the two countries had signed the Treaty of Basic Relations between Japan and South Korea in an accompanying claims agreement. Under the treaty's terms, Japan gave South Korea more than $500 million in grants and loans, which, in Japan's view, completely and finally resolve all compensation questions. As a result, Tokyo urged Japanese firms to ignore the court rulings. Lawyers for the plaintiffs have since asked South Korean courts to seize the Japanese firm's Korea based assets. In January, a district court froze the assets of a Japanese steelmaker, but these have yet to be sold off. The legal dispute came just after South Korean President Moon Jae-in made a controversial decision. Back in 2015, Japan and South Korea had established a joint foundation as part of a bilateral agreement on the issue of comfort women. South Korean women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II. Japan contributed $9 million to the foundation, which was supposed to pay compensation to the surviving victims and their families. But the agreement was unpopular in South Korea and tainted by its association with Moon's impeached predecessor, uh, Park Geun-hye. In November 2018, Moon announced his decision to shutter the foundation. The South Korean government reviewed, but decided to retain the Comfort Women Agreement earlier in 2018. But by ignoring Japanese calls not to close the foundation, it has undermined its credibility with Tokyo, which now fears that any bilateral agreement between the two will not be kept. Earlier this year, Japan threatened to respond by curtailing visas for South Koreans and raising tariffs on South Korean imports. Then, in July, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe announced his intention to restrict the export of three chemicals that South Korean companies need in order to produce semiconductors for screens and cell phones. Going a step further, he threatened to remove South Korea from Japan's whitelist countries that face minimum trade restrictions. Tokyo cited national security reasons for the move, but Seoul called it economic retaliation for its recent Supreme Court rulings and on July 19, threatened to pull off its intelligence sharing agreement with Japan. In addition, South Korea has vowed to seek out new export partners and reduce its dependence on Japan for high tech components. So this is no joke because what really gets my eye here is that they're talking reparations, and the method and mechanisms that they're using to actually pay the reparations is actually can actually be used as a case study for people who claim ADOS. They set up this institution for those of you who weren't paying attention. They set up these institutions, they being South Korea and Japan, in order to compensate the victims of slavery and forced labor, um, well, not sexual slavery, sexual slave trafficking, and sexual bondage and
during
forced labor. Go
during the
ahead.
Second World War. During the Second World War.
Yeah, and
Um, yeah,
no, I was
yeah.
just going to make the point that this is actually a really good case study because that's not that long ago that this happened.
No, no, going back about 75 years. I mean, it's certainly not that long ago. It's reparations have been paid around a lot of the places,
Hmm.
and this is another case. Yeah. So when people sit back here and say, "Hey, man, you guys are just talking and it's not relevant to us," yeah, it is. This is right. This right here. This is a reparations case,
Hmm.
and this could this could set a good example because this has been a hot button and been going and it's been a real issue with Japan, Korea, and China
Hmm.
um, since the war.
The Philippines too.
Yeah, the Philippines. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But the Koreans and the Chinese were without question
Hmm.
enslaved, and like the Comfort Woman game and all that went on. It was ill,
They did a
and
lot of horrific things to the Chinese, man. They ran all types of experiments on them, and
it
you
was
know.
no, man. The Japanese were on some next shit, and
Hmm.
and they went ham. They went ham, and yeah, they do owe reparations because they were a vicious, bloodthirsty, rapacious enemy. Um, Especially their campaign through China as they started in the 30s and really we when Mao and his crew got together and really beat them back, it was something that was pretty important. But those guys have done a lot of damage. They had taken over a lot of land and did a lot of damage. Korea, they were savage there. So the Japanese were pretty bad folks. And yeah, and reparations is a piece. This is nothing new. This has been talked about a long time. And remember, we gave reparations to the Japanese that we interned here as well. So
Hmm.
there's reparations case for that. So we should look at all these things that we'll look at because there are plenty of examples of reparations being given to others, and the models that people are talking about and some of the stuff that they're talking about has already been done. Um, but this is another great case that should be looked at very closely.
And think about what they paid out to each person who's a victim. $90,000.
90 grand, right?
The other thing that the case shows to me is that it shows what happens when you don't settle it properly. When you don't when you don't say, well, look, we know what happened. We want all the individuals to come forward, and this is how we're going to do it. We can't you making this side deal, the government deal, or like in the case of the U.S. and ADOS, the elite black people and the U.S. government making deals for the other 90% of black people in America. You can't do that. Otherwise, the thing is going to come back, come back, and come back, and come back. It's going to come. It's going to come at you over and over and over again if you don't settle it properly.
Right. A lot of people who claim ADOS and talk about reparations, they don't look at the nuances that you just mentioned, Nagone and DE, and what this article is mentioning. Um, this is between two nation states. You're talking about a people with a hashtag trying to go at it, the largest superpower in the world with a hashtag. I'm sorry, but You cannot sit behind your keyboard on YouTube and throw up farm animals like sheep and goats and stuff and think that you're really doing something. This is serious business. Um, this is where the big boys really come and play and really sit down and chop up game. This is not easy. If the Koreans are having a hard time getting reparations and from Japan, and they have a formidable military as well, and they have a very strong economic base. If they're having a hard time getting this done, you can imagine what blacks in America have to go through. I mean, they're talking about $90,000 per person, and we don't know how many hundreds of thousands, if not a million, people were in captivity during World War II. Oh, not World War II, between 1910 and 1945.
Yeah, I mean that's and it culminated heavily at the end of the Second World War. I also maintain here in this country, looking at the rather right wing nature of this country, of this nation.
Hmm.
As I said, since the Civil War, when
Hmm.
we had our first Republican president was Lincoln, um, straight up till today, there have been 28 presidents elected, and out of that 28, 19 have been Republican. So it kind of tells you, even though things have changed a little bit from the earlier Republican days where they were very anti, very abolitionist, to where they've come to a very hard right wing view. The right wing players have played a very heavy role here in this country. So what am I really saying? What I'm saying is you're not going to get the reparations you want without a certain level of violence, and people are going to have to sit down and understand that as well. Sorry to bring that up, but that's going to be part of the equation. I know some folks don't want to hear that.
Hey, Nagon, I gotta ask you a question.
Yeah.
Were earlier Republicans or earlier presidents, well, Republicans, I should say,
Mm.
were they more amenable to reparations, whether it be 40 acres of mule
Yeah,
or
yeah,
payment
yeah.
or
They
to
were.
reparations than the latest bunch of even Democrat presidents?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They actually were. They were the abolitionists. They were the ones that came and they were the ones that ushered in. Um, the Republicans were the ones that ushered in Reconstruction, and they did talk about the whole land reform piece, which was your 40 acres and a mule, and they wanted to give most blacks some, few got a little, but most did not. And as we were going through Reconstruction, which only lasted 10 years and got shut down, and the whole land reform piece, but once the Northern powers had overcome the Southern powers and then cut a deal with the Southerners, to say, okay, we're in charge now, we're running your shit, okay, make sure you develop your product and bring it up north so we can, with our industrial game we're playing, you guys don't raise your hands against us again. And the Southerners, cut a deal with the North, and then that whole land reform piece and all that got shut down. So our the people who were in favor of us getting it um, um, basically vacated us, and we were left hanging in the lurch. And that was after the Reconstruction period, which lasts 10 years, which a lot of us are not very aware of, and why you can't talk about reparations without Reconstruction. And that's in essence what we're really talking about, and we've been suffering from that ever since. Um, but that is the essence of the argument. So to answer your question, the very earliest Republican, since it was an anti-slavery type of party, not that it ran strictly on anti-slavery, because Lincoln did not run on an anti-slavery um, platform. He did say, that he would end slavery if that would save the nation, the Union, and he would keep slavery if it would save the Union as well. So he wasn't really so much on your side. Just when we got into the war and had to get into a battle, had to get a lot of people in there, we came in as a very valuable resource. You weren't given slavery, you shot your way out of it, and we were we were hoodwinked in the end. And the northern powers that came down to help us um, did not honor their deal after a certain period of time, because they just, what they really wanted was to get their business going, keep things moving, expand more into the west, and you know work with the southern landowners and forget about land reform for us. And we were not supported after that. We just weren't supported. So So yeah, the earlier ones were, but as time went on, they were definitely against us, and the ones that are in here now were more like the old Democrats of the of, 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 of the late 18th of the late 19th century, moving into the 20th. They were very much that way. Really, the Democratic Party and things kind of changed a bit around, or its perceptions changed around underneath Franklin, Franklin D. But the New Deal and all that, which was the raw deal for us, but all that. But at the end of the day, that's kind of where we started seeing a little bit of the change, where blacks started moving away from the Republican Party to the Democrats, and some of the promises um, from Roosevelt and his wife and all that. But that's kind of the story. It's a big history on this, but really we were not backed up. So that's why when we talk about reparations, you have to talk about reconstruction. And what does that mean? Rebuilding the nation, which was owed to you. You had to reconstruct your nation. You had to reconstruct the populace, reconstruct your people, reconstruct the country to actually and to engage all of its citizens. And that was only done for a short period of time. It wasn't properly done. It wasn't properly done. It still hasn't been in many, many, many ways. We cannot talk about one without the other.
Yeah. Let me get to this next article before we close out. Um, this one is from DEFCON Warning System.com. Expect a war between Russia and China in the 2020s. It's a very serious article. During his state visit to Russia early this month, President Xi Jinping of China effusively hailed President Vladimir Putin of Russia as his best friend and colleague. Putin, not to be outdone, replied by affirming his personal respect for Xi, and suggested that Sino-Russian relations have progressed not only to an unprecedentedly high level in recent years, but are now increasingly based on a truly comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction. But whatever Putin means by strategic interaction, and despite the undeniable progress in Sino-Russian relations over the past decade, it is easy to fall into the trap of exaggerating what some fear is an emerging Sino-Russian axis in the world politics, notwithstanding the Putin friendship and the growing congruence of both countries' interest in undermining the US-led international order. Relations between Russia and China remain at the core as brittle and prone to mutual suspicion and distrust as they have in the past. It is, after all, only 50 years since the two Eurasian giants nearly stumbled into a cataclysmic war following a series of unprovoked Chinese attacks on Soviet troops garrisoned along the then contested river boundaries in Russia's far east. Although Moscow stayed its hand from an all-out military assault on China, the broader clashes of 1969 continue to rankle historical memories and military thinking in Russia to this day. Such territorial jostling along the vast expanses of Eurasia has, in fact, defined Russo Chinese relations historically and will continue to do so in the future. And therein lies the existential rub, especially for Russia. From the perspective of a strategic planner in Moscow, China, which contains 1.5 billion people, not only dwarfs Mother Russia in population, national power, and economic might, it has also, much more worryingly, become a near military equal, prone to intimidation and throwing its weight around its periphery at will. Witness, for example, Beijing's swift and brazen conquest of the South China Sea, the unrelenting probing into Vietnamese, Philippine, and Japanese maritime spaces, and its west and to its west, the frequent incursion standoffs and aggressive territorial claims against India. Hmm. Let me see if that's still there. Come on, man. None of these acts of Chinese belligerence will have escaped the notice of Russian planners who, despite the paradox of Moscow's shared strategic interests with Beijing to counter America's power and influence in world affairs, are nonetheless bound to view China's rapid and inexorable rise to the front rank of global powers with acute concern. But despite any apprehensions, Moscow may quietly harbor Russo Chinese relations in the short term. Over the next 4 or 5 years, are likely to remain largely in harmony. But this this is mainly because Putin's carefully tended relationship with Xi enables him, among other things, to maintain the pretense of Russia as a great power, attract Chinese investment, and more generally project an image of himself as a world-class statesman. And Xi, although leading an immeasurably more powerful country than Russia, except in terms of offensive nuclear firepower, tactfully grants Putin the appearance and the status of an equal through elaborately choreographed summit meetings and bestowing of high level state and friendship awards and personal respect in order to secure at least tacit difference by Moscow to the Sino-centric Eurasian geopolitical order currently being planned in Beijing. Yet, beyond the apparent uh, bonhomie and geopolitical dalliance between Xi and Putin, the historic and atavistic tensions be deeply rooted between the Slavic and Han civilizations represented by Russia and China are bound to emerge again, probably in violent form in the next decade. In fact, signs already abound of Russian nervousness as China relentlessly pushes its Silk Road initiatives, coercive uh, economic practices, and diplomatic uh, blandishments deep into the entire former Soviet space in Central Asia. Although the Chinese have so far refrained from asserting strategically security rights in the geopolitical arc along Russia's southern periphery, it is only a matter of time before some hyper nationalist general in Beijing does so. The Russians can be relied upon to react with unrestrained fury. But what will likely drive Russia to a defensive war with China before the next decade is the growing probability of Chinese territorial encroachment into Russia's sparsely populated far eastern region bordering the Pacific. The Russian territories north of Amur and east of the Ussuri rivers in eastern Central Asia, which currently uh, uh, demarcate the agreed boundaries between the two countries, are historically and essentially claimed by China. Chinese military maps even show these areas as Chinese territories. These territorial claims, combined with the sheer population disparities, over 130 million people live in three Chinese provinces, according bordering Russia's far east, where the population is estimated at less than 8 million, and the need to secure long-term access to living space and natural resources almost uh, preordains that Beijing will sooner or later demand revisions to what it calls unequal border treaties with Tsarist Russia dating back to the mid 19th century. And although the Russians are equally bound to resist, it is not inconceivable that China at some point will demand access or land lease rights to parts of Russia's Far East, or failing that the Chinese army will simply march across the border into Vladivostok, Russia's only warm water access to the Pacific, to stamp China's historic claim and rights to the region. It is not clear at this juncture how Russia and China can step back from a conflict in the coming decade. But as China appears unlikely to relinquish its expansive territorial claims against its neighbors, including Russia, the onus for deterring China from seizing Russian territories will fall upon Putin or his successors in the 2020s. The question of whether China really can be deterred as its geostrategic ambitions grow across Eurasia remains to be seen. If the current Xi Putin romance fails to tamp down Chinese expansionism, expected war between the two nuclear armed states in the 2020s. Um, I think it's a good synopsis, but I'm not
Ain't
buying.
buying it. I ain't buying it.
Yeah, I'm not buying
I
that.
ain't buying. I ain't buying
I,
that, man. That's
I'm
wild.
not buying that they're going to go to war to build some apartment buildings for people that they don't really care about.
And like I said, it makes me wonder who's writing the article and what are they really trying to say here.
Hmm.
So I'm questioning the media on this. Yeah,
Hmm.
that makes no sense to me. Let's put
Hmm.
two and two together and get four. I'm putting two and two together. And I'm getting 75.6 to the tenth. You
Well, that's manosphere math, anyways.
know.
De, what do you think?
Me, I think um, the current situation, what countries want most in this at this time is peace, because the world population actually don't like wars, and that's the reason why you see the U.S. to a certain extent having to pull back from it. We're gonna fight everybody, no matter how much it costs. Attitude, because people are start form alliances to kind of like say that we just tired of your wars, stop. We just tired of your wars, stop. Um, China is not going to push Russia too hard, and that will prevent that war that this guy is talking about. The second thing is with the U.S. pulling back. Um, I'm thinking that without NATO, most of Europe is going to go east, and when that happens, you're going to have a really more balanced economic situation going on. Even though China is going to be strong economically, stronger than everybody else, um, technology normally uh, kind of like kind of keeps you from going overboard. It's like technology normally, and Nagon can tell you that technology. You might invent an airplane, like airplanes were flying long before. Say okay, let's make it modern. Um, the U.S. were building passenger aircraft after World War II, and then the Europeans come along and they start building their aircraft. So now you got Airbus. So now the Chinese start building their aircraft, right? And the Russians are also building their passenger aircraft. So as technology changes, you get this more balanced approach. So you don't have America selling aircraft to the rest of the world, but the rest of the world not only building their own aircraft, but selling it to other people also. So technology, the current technology, I'm not talking about the bow and arrow age before when people were fighting for land. But technology now, unless we have, unless they go to war over, say, water resources, you know, these wars gonna end, and technology normally keeps that from happening. That's my opinion. From what I'm looking at and seeing with the technology, it this it's kind of like forced the Chinese to come together with the look at Bitcoin. America used to use well, not Bitcoin but blockchain. America used to use the dollar as a hegemon. Now countries are moving away from the dollar towards blockchain. So now you can't use your currency as an economic war
weapon.
tool weapon. You know, so with the change in technology, it normally kind of brings balance. And every time something goes out of balance, something else comes along to force it back into balance. And that's the way the work. That's the way the whole planet has gone from. I mean, as far we can go back in history, you know. Yes, it would go out of balance for a short while. Say like from 19, I would say 1945, when the U.S. got the atomic bomb, until the Russians got the atomic bomb, and then the
47.
Chinese got the atomic bomb. So you see what I'm saying? The balance comes back. It doesn't come back immediately, but it comes back slowly, and it brings things back. So I don't think that China and Russia is going to go to war. They might be skirmishes at like, you know, they might get upset at one another for some one move or other, but they're going to talk about it more than shooting one another over the problem.
Plus,
That
they
that
don't. Mhm. Go ahead.
that
Go
type
ahead.
of
To go.
war, that type of war would be disastrous. It would be disastrous. Would take
No.
over all of you. It would be disastrous.
Yeah, it wouldn't be worth it either because for what they're trying to gain, what they're trying to accomplish, it would be short lived. You have to protect all those people. And plus, you don't want to
Exactly.
have to fight a war on two fronts. If you're if you're China, you don't want to have to fight against Russia and fight against the United States. That would be suicide.
Exactly correct. And the Germans did that twice in World War I and World War II, and we saw what the end results of those situations were. It would be the same. Plus, all of Eurasia going up in fire, and then just no chance, man. Not anything that would really make any sense. So that's what I'm saying. I'm looking at this article. I'm like, who's writing this?
I
And
mean,
and, 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 and what's the purpose behind it?
it's possible that they would go to war because there has been different institutes who have said that China is in need of energy.
But that
And
can all be negotiated. You don't have to go to war for that.
Exactly. It not only be negotiated. Guess what?
Mhm.
Putin is saying, "Hey, we got the energy. You
yeah,
can have it."
Yeah,
no, I'm saying like the article said, when if you have a rogue general or something like that that decides, yeah, this is a good idea, to go in there and try to take the energy from a weak Russia, not from a strong Russia, but from a weak Russia.
you take
Um,
you you take that guy in the back and you put two in the back of his head and you keep it moving.
yeah,
That's what China normally does.
That's exactly what you do. Okay, okay.
That's what
yeah,
China normally does.
You,
They
you,
take him
you,
out.
you give him a steel jacket and Excedrin and you keep it moving.
yeah,
Yeah, that's it.
yeah. That's always been rumors that China becomes desperate for energy, they may go into Russia and try to take uh, the energy that Russia has. I mean, that's possible, but they that would be short lived. The sort of gains that China would try to get out of going to war with Moscow would be so short lived. It wouldn't be worth it. And Chinese are not that stupid. They're very energy dependent. So sending Chinese workers up to work in Russia, and Russia sends energy back down in exchange is actually a very relatively good thing. Russia has a lot of modern technology that they can actually share with the Chinese, and China has a lot of surplus and money in terms of human capital that they can send right back up into Russia. Previously, they were using North Koreans for the labor, in the same way that the United States uses Mexico and many Latin Americans, for labor. So I think a lot of it has stopped in the last couple of years, but you know, uh, I think Moscow and Beijing are in very good positions right now. They have their eyes set on everything from the Middle East or everything from the continent of Africa all the way back into all the way back into the warm water ports that of Vladivostok. So very
Oh
little
yeah,
interest.
I don't see Russia ever letting anybody take that port under no circumstances. I mean, so China has
No,
to say, you
no
know what?
way,
The
no
Russians
chance.
are not
That's
going
never
to allow
happened.
this to happen.
Totally
We
agree.
don't we don't want half of China being burnt down. So why would we start a war?
It's like I said, I have suspicions of why. Of I'm one of this person was working for the CIA or something like this, writing this
Oh
kind of
yeah.
crap. This is total bullshit. Pardon my expression, but that's how
Mhm.
I see it, man. Talking this crap, no. Sorry, man. I like to listen to stuff that makes sense. Just because somebody writes it down, it's nonsensical. We need to talk. This is whack. So that doesn't make sense. I don't know. How do you see it, De? I don't see it
Right?
as being sensible.
Well, I don't see it that way either. This is not
Mm,
Ukraine that you could go in there and start something.
that's
This is
exactly
in
right.
Russian territory. This is on Russian territory. The U.S. can't send the CIA to foment, any kind of foolishness, and then get China. You understand what I'm saying? So this
Whack.
is not Ukraine. It can't.
This
I
is
don't
whack.
see it happening.
I read too much stuff. Look at. Nah, this is whack. This is crazy. Crazy
All right.
madness.
Let
All
me
right, go
get to
ahead.
this next. Let me get to the last one. This one is from RT.com. Hell freezes over. New York Times wants closer relationship with Russia. Congratulates Trump. All right, let me span this out. The New York Times editorial board, fresh from peddling anti-Russia conspiracies for 2 years, has made a remarkable about turn. Now the paper wants closer relations with the Kremlin, all to thwart China's ambitions. Russiagate has maintained an iron grip on American political discourse for 2 years now, even after special counsel Robert Mueller's report cleared Donald Trump on conspiring with the Kremlin to steal the 2016 U.S. election. In the media, the public has been treated to nightly conspiracy theories and bizarre connect the dots articles claiming to prove collusion. And lawmakers have crafted even more draconian sanctions bills against Russia and have slotted opposition to Russia into their campaign messages. Meanwhile, Moscow and Beijing have looked at each other, holding joint military exercises and upping their trade volume to more than $100 billion in 2018. Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev recently announced plans to build a new 2,000-kilometer long highway linking Europe and China, while President Vladimir Putin has been mulling connecting Russia's Northern Sea route with China's maritime Silk Road, an ambitious global trade route linking China and ports with ports in Southeast Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. The idea of a closer The idea of a closer Moscow Beijing cooperation clearly worries the New York Times editorial board. In an op ed published on Sunday, the board wrote that President Trump is correct to try to establish a sounder relationship with Russia and peel it away from China. Itself a remarkable compliment from a paper that ran op-eds titled Donald Trump hates America and Trump is racist to the bone in the last 5 days. The board then suggested that the U.S. could strengthen its cooperation with Russia in space exploration and Arctic cleanup, areas untainted by Russian gate. In addition, new arms control treaties could be a step towards geopolitical cooperation between the two rival superpowers. All valid and worthy points, but from the New York Times, yes, we are talking about the same newspaper that last year called Trump a treasonous traitor ahead of his meeting with Putin in Helsinki. Instead of seeking rapprochement, then The paper argued that Trump should be directing all resources at his disposal to punish Russia. We're talking about the same New York Times that dubbed Trump Putin's lackey and released a mocking video detailed a love story between Trump and Putin, laden with homoerotic overtones and culminating in a tongue-locking kiss between the two elders. It's because they were. I'm not going to repeat that here. Um, yeah. So the New York Times basically pushed an agenda in one of their op-eds that denotes that America should work with Russia. And the reality is that these rag sheets, these publications made their profits off of bashing Russia and claiming that Donald Trump was somehow in collusion with these guys, even after the Mueller report came back and said they found no collusion. Very polarizing state of affairs in staff writers as well.
Um, I know, I know it appears like that, but I consider goals now just waiting to jump in there because let me say something. We just read an article about this guy who wrote saying, "Hey, Russia don't have any problems. They don't have any debt. Now that the Mueller report absolved them and every wrongdoing, we can invest in Russia." And guess what this article is saying? The same thing. Am I right, Nagone, or not?
That's about how I'm seeing it.
Okay, you're the economics man, so take off, bro.
I'm not gonna take it. I think you're right. You're right on my thinking on this. So, I just, there are certain people advancing certain kind of narratives, and you just have to watch this stuff. You have to watch this. You just have to watch this very closely. A lot going on right now, and there's a lot of people trying to confuse you for some different reasons. My bottom line, and I try to keep things very, very, very simple. Like with anything out here in all this complexity, I try to keep it very simple. Follow the money. Follow the money. Just keep your eyes on that. Where are things moving? I think that gives you your answer. I'm just going to leave it at that. Mike, Mike, you there? De.
Mike is muted. I think he muted for a minute. But you're right, bro. That's the way I see this article. Um,
Yeah, man.
I don't know if the article. Sometimes these guys write articles. Somebody is kind of telling somebody else, "This is what we want you to do." You
Mm-hmm.
understand? And,
Mm-hmm.
and then later on, you'll see maybe the next president comes in, or this president gets reelected, and he starts doing the same thing that they say do.
Well, well, keep in mind that it's very profitable to bash Russia and to bash Trump. It gets you a lot of hits. It gets you a lot
Mm-hmm.
of get you a lot of attention in the media publication space. So the way they're spinning this, man, is it's as of they they came up with the solution. In reality, Trump was the one who said initially that we should build better relations with Russia. But when he said that, they said that he was in bed with with Putin. It was a sort of bromance that they're talking about. Kind of broke back mountainish sort of deal, and tried to shame him for it. Now they're coming up with a article 2 3 years 2.5 years later, 3 years later, that somehow some way, yeah, this is a good idea. Maybe Trump should build a relationship with Moscow. Well, that's what he said originally in 2016. And they tried to say that he was in collusion, and then for the Mueller report to come back and finally say no, we found no collusion. Um, James Comey said on in front of a panel of John McCain and the rest of them, said that there was no um there was no evidence to support that the Russians hacked anything. So the New York Times, being a major publication, has to push this agenda in order to sell newspapers. Um, you see this in the manosphere a lot. You see a lot of guys pushing, or a lot of content creators pushing, you know, should black, can you be pro-black while sleeping with a white woman? Can you, if we got reparations, um, how would you get it? Would it be in gift cards? Would it be in vouchers? Would it be in bonds? Would it be, in EBT credits or something like that? You see these sort of shocking headlines and publications being pushed by content creators, and that's the way they make their money, through the sensationalism of ignorance.
You see, one of the things that
That's what media is all about. That's what media
they
is all
were
about. Okay.
they were pushing the warrior queen because they were on a war binge
Hmm.
across the Middle East, going up towards Russia.
Hmm.
That's one of the things that scared Turkey too. But anyway, they were on a war binge, and everywhere that she could start up a conflict, she was doing it. When she didn't get elected, they were like pissed off.
Oh, they were very angry.
Yep.
Now things have calmed down a little bit, and they're going under the cover of the Mueller report to say what had said a long time ago. If they didn't start this foolishness in Ukraine, Russia would not go on east of China, and the rise of China would have been delayed. I don't know how you guys see this, but that's the way I see it. Russia would China would still be the inroads that China announced in the last 3-4 years. They would have delayed it for the next president, not for this, not right now.
Hmm.
Russia would not have joined them to execute. They they would have taken over Syria without a problem. But Russia ended up pushing back after they joined with China.
Well,
China pushing back in the South China Sea. All of those things China would have gone slow with instead of pushing it, because these people made an error. They made a bad. I mean, one of the worst steps they made is attacking Putin.
keep in mind that they peeled China away under Nixon, peeled China away from the Soviet Union, under Kissinger. That was Kissinger's strategy, and it worked to a certain extent. It was a short term gain, because 30 years later, China came back, and now they're shaking. They're doing the dance with Putin in Moscow. So you have joint military exercises, 8, 9, 10 times a year. Um, Energy cooperation, um, technological cooperation, 5G, autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles, and so on and so forth. Um, Exchanges in goods and services. Um, Russian bank is still a very strong point for the Eurasian economy. China is pumping money into the Eurasian economy. Uh, United States overplayed themselves on this one, and they ignored Africa. So now you have the Chinese all in Africa. You have Moscow making good relations with, out of the 54 countries, 48 of them they have very strong relations with now, and the United States has very little relations with any of these countries on the continent, and they have no penetration into Asia.
Critical mistake on the continent going into Libya and doing what we did. A big
They,
black mark on Obama. Big black mark. Did some really good stuff. I thought Obama and a lot of people don't like him. I liked him.
Hmm.
I understood what he was doing, but that was a mistake there. That
Hmm.
was a mistake, and that has given China a very strong hand in that, and that's going to play itself out over the next 30 years in Africa in some very, very, very deleterious ways for us.
Hmm.
Um, so we'll go, very. We should have just coughed up France, let them drop, and let's move on because they're going down anyway. So that there's no way to really stop that from happening. But that was a very poor. That was a very very poor play we made. Um, so yeah. So that's Mike. I'm just following up on you on that.
well, like
Mm,
Nicole, they made a
yeah.
deal with Bill Clinton. This is it. It was. I mean,
Hillary or
up
Bill?
to now, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, they had. I mean, Barack Obama had the ideal position to change. He had changed the world's attitude in his first 6 months in office. He had changed the world's attitude towards America. America, people all over the world was in love with America, and Barack Obama squandered it because of his deal with Bill Clinton.
I don't know if he
He brought
squandered
in
it.
that he
I
brought in
mean,
that gang, and they took over his administration and ran it the way they felt like running.
Hmm.
no, I don't necessarily agree. I follow what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree. I think there was
He
certain
made
things.
deals with them.
I was certain things he did that I feel was very problematic, and that Libya thing is real. I have some real issues with that. Because that is not going to play out well for us as time goes on in this thing.
I
You
don't.
know,
I don't think he had much to do with the Libya bombing, if anything, because if you listen to General Wesley Clark,
Mm-mm.
Wesley Clark says this was being
The
designed
Clinton
long
and
before
Hillary, right,
this was
But
being long before he was even thought of being president.
I
right.
understand that. But at
Mhm.
the end of the day, I'm still an old
The,
time thinker of the buck stops here. You know what I'm saying?
the
So
optics, you're saying the
the,
optics
the, and,
of.
and and the optics are bad. So he's being held responsible for that.
Mhm.
I'm holding him responsible for that as well. And I
Mhm.
feel that some of the things should have been done.
Mhm.
I think that was very short term thinking and more Eurocentric on the continent, which I think was obscene. And I feel that we're gonna still pay a heavy price for that as time goes on,
You know
and
what? Look,
and it's going to take 20 to 30 years for it
I'm
to play out. But anyway, go ahead.
Muammar. Muammar was still singing his praises. Muammar said, "This is my brother. I love him."
He came
Muammar
to
was
the White
singing his
House.
praises. I'm serious. And then this idiot turned around, let Hillary Clinton do this foolishness. It
Mhm.
was ridiculous.
Yeah, he came to the White House, and under that, under those conditions, under the options of it being Barack, um, he also gave up his nuclear weapons.
Yep.
Sure did, and right after he gave up his nukes, and his son and all them Sifo went in there, all talking, we giving up our nukes and all that. We went in there and we attacked them. That sent a real message out to that hasn't been forgotten. They said this is going to play out. This is going to play out. Usually things like this take a while to play out fully, but this is going to
Yep.
play out, and it's going to play out to our disadvantage. That was not the right move. Following behind these fucking white boys. That shit was out of the question. We shouldn't have been doing that. And China is right to take advantage of what they're doing right now. 'Cause, you know, you know, what are we doing? Very, very poor, very, very poor move. Very, very poor move on the continent, and that's going to have strong international effects because Russia, China, all of them, they're all decusating, all crossing in Africa. That's going to play a big role. It's going to play a big role with energy, technology, next 30 years. It's going to play a very big role. That was a mistake. That was a mistake, man. That was a mistake.
I don't
That's
even
what
know if
I'll
they
say.
can. I don't even know if they can recover the fumble on that play because,
Yeah.
um, United States reputation with this tangerine tyrant in the White House with the stuff he's saying, Africa's a shithole and things like that. That really sours the relations between United States and the continent. And now, when it's time, I mean, this is the wrong guy to actually be in position to do any sort of negotiations in relationship between that and the continent. So if they would wanted to peel Africa away from China, that window of opportunity is gone now. You should have done that 10 years ago. But um, the short sightedness of pale faced people, man, always seems to come back and haunt them later. Um, had they offered, see, what the United States tried to offer, the continent was a lot of military toys and training and stuff like that. People in Nigeria don't need to be trained on how to shoot a gun. They know how to shoot guns. I mean, everybody in Africa knows how to shoot a gun. What they should have been doing was they should have been building institutions over there that were meaningful, that were going to have high returns on investment, and they shot themselves in the foot. Now you got China coming in. They're building hospitals. They're building highways and bridges and infrastructure. Meanwhile, the United States shows up with an M4 rifle and says, "Here, you can have one of these as a souvenir, as a goodwill gesture." And I'm like, that's terrible policy. And now you got this yo-yo John Bolton in charge of the African foreign policy now. And before they had Rex Tillerson. Rex Tillerson was all over Africa trying to broker deals, and they got him right up out of the White House. Oh no, now you got to go.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are very, very short-sighted, and we tend to make these mistakes a lot. And we've done it time and time again. And it's you can count you can count these white dudes to go overboard. And Obama went with that. I'm just like, well, man, these guys, man. Anyway, not a good move, but I think for many Afro Americans who are thinking from a more international type of perspective, we are going to have to foray there over the next generation in some fairly significant numbers with some intelligence and some resources to take advantage, because I think the opportunities are going to continue to be very large there.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these other Americans who are was thinking a little further down the road, 50, 100 years down the line, like you should be thinking, um, are going to look to maybe start to deal a little bit differently, because I think they see this thing is shaping up a little differently here. But not a good move we made in Libya. That was not very smart at all. Long term thinking, not very smart. That's it. I'm done on that.
I would also argue that Libya, not just Libya, but Sudan, South Sudan, they
For sure,
they
for
um
sure,
they
for sure.
they bogged that one up too. The whole Save Our Girls, Bring Back Our Girls campaign. What a disaster that was. So you're right, Nagone. In hindsight, um, Obama dropped the ball in many areas in the continent alone. I mean, when he went to Jamaica and he chastised the Jamaican leadership there for patriarchy and toxic masculinity, and the Jamaicans are looking at him like, what is this guy talking about? Get this nigga out my country.
Yeah, they were looking at him like an extra long simp walking around, and that's yeah. I mean, like you said, he did some good stuff, but he made some of those. He made some errors. He made some significant blunders internationally, as far as I'm
Hmm.
concerned, especially on the continent.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah, if I could write a foreign policy, man, if I was in his cabinet back then, man, things would be much more radically different.
they,
Um,
they sure would,
it
sure
would have been
would.
radically different. I mean, there's so many low key areas that the United States could have done to actually strengthen relations and peel them away from China. It would have been easy to woo um, the continent into the grips of the West, and the West dropped the ball. They didn't, and it's not just Obama, but you can go back to Bush. Bush did nothing. He ignored the continent for the most part. Um, Clinton did nothing. During Rwanda and things of
Hey,
that nature.
they started Rwanda.
Yeah,
Not they didn't do anything. They started it. They're the ones who got that thing started. People don't see that, but they're the ones who did it.
I mean, I listened to Clinton saying, well, one of my big mistakes is we didn't intervene in Rwanda and
They
stop
did.
and stop what they were doing. It came in very late. 90 days. You lost you lost their damn near million people. I mean, come on, man. I mean, unbelievable. Now, the Rwandans themselves have turned that country around to one of the most well-run countries on the continent,
hmm
and is a growing nation right now. Who's turned itself around, but by itself. So you
and
know,
and
you know.
and what was I about to say? Telling Elon Omar to go back to your own country, that doesn't really help.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Those sort of things don't really help. You got this tangerine buffoon running around, just shooting his mouth off and really hurting their credibility. Because every time they swear up and down that they're not who they say they are and who we think they are, they go back to doing exactly what they being accused of. So
That's right.
I know a lot of people say that black people should vote Republican, but in in all actuality, the face of the party is completely incongruent with the best interests of Black Americans. I mean, I know there's pundits on YouTube who like to push that narrative, but there's a difference between being conservative and being a part of the party. You can be conservative and not be a part of the party. Um, and unfortunately, Black people still are under this notion that if we just join that party, then that would help. Not that I'm against anybody joining the party, but I just think that there needs to be some clear thinkers sitting at the table and actually having these conversations, rather than these party loyalists who want to jump over there and say, yeah, I'm sitting down at the White House with this guy, like some of these shines on YouTube, like to go up to the White House and play footsies with the tangerine monster.
Yeah, and then the Henry Mom saying, "Dance, sucker, dance,
hmm
dance, sucker." Yeah,
hmm
yeah, 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 yeah. Mm, unbelievable.
Yeah, Black people need their own political party. It has always been my position. Get your own political party. If you're not going to form your own political party, at least form your own political affairs committee, like APAC or like CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, and then you can have some serious muscle. Because right now everybody's running around looking flabby and sick like Larry Holmes.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. Well, we can get into a deep discussion on this, but I don't want to get into that right now. But yeah, we can get into this deep, real deep.
You gotta
All right.
realize that we are emotional people. We've not we have become an emotional people. A kind of female uh, centric people
Mhm.
that instead of looking at things logically, instead of looking at saying, you know what, this is what has always happened. What can we do to change the narrative? If we do this to change the narrative, and then talk to each other about it. Nope. Anybody who bring up the subject about changing the narrative, man, you're anti-black, man. Something's wrong with you, man. What's
Well,
wrong with you?
you got these shines on YouTube, flagging brothers' channels down and claiming to be for the people, man, while they behind the scenes, dancing for the opposite gender, for the BW, and even sometimes for the BBW, and flagging brothers' channels down. I don't know, man. They always claim to be leaders in their community, but they can't even lead their own channels.
Boy, oh my gosh.
But thank you all for
Whew.
joining us, man. Hit the like button if you have not already done so, and share the video if possible. Hit that notification bell so you get all the updates as we move on to another platform. After tonight, in the next 20 minutes, you probably won't see uh, a lot of people in the manosphere on their panels anymore due to the transition in the next 20 minutes.
Is it hitting at 12 o'clock, or is it going to be on for the first and then end after the first? How's it going? How are they going to do
It
this?
says start. It says starting on the first, August 1st.
Did it say what time? It doesn't
Yeah,
say.
it doesn't say what time. I'm assuming that the East Coast takes precedence over everything else, but I could be wrong. But thank you all for joining us, and shalom.
All right. Peace, Lagoon. Peace, Mike.
Peace.